Across the vast northern world of Eurasia, one of the most influential cultural and linguistic groupings has been the Altaic peoples. Their earliest homeland is generally associated with the region surrounding the Altai Mountains. Yet over time, they spread across an immense territory, stretching from Central Asia into Siberia, the Near East, and even parts of Eastern Europe. Despite this wide dispersion, their languages fall into three broad families: Turkic, Mongolic, and Manchu-Tungusic. Each of these branches developed its own identity while still preserving traces of a shared past, shaped by migration, adaptation, and cultural exchange. Within the Turkic-speaking world, a remarkable diversity of peoples emerged. These include not only the well-known Ottoman Turks, but also groups such as the Turkmens east of the Caspian Sea, the Tatars of the Volga and Crimea, the Bashkirs of the Ural region, and the Kyrgyz of Central Asia. Further east, smaller communities formed around the Altai Mountains, each with distinct dialects and traditions. Even in the far north, the Yakuts along the Lena River preserved a Turkic identity while adapting to a harsh Arctic environment. The Chuvash, living along a bend of the Volga, represent another branch that followed its own historical path, while maintaining deep linguistic connections to the wider Turkic world. The Mongolic peoples trace their origins to the lands around Lake Baikal. Over time, they expanded outward, absorbing neighbouring tribes and sometimes imposing their language and culture on others. In certain regions, groups that were once Turkic gradually adopted Mongolic speech. Waves of conquest carried Mongol influence far beyond their homeland, reaching as far as Afghanistan, where remnants of these movements can still be seen. Closely related to them are the Kalmyks, who migrated westward and settled near the Volga, as well as the Buryats, who remained near Baikal and preserved many older traditions. Further east, the Manchu-Tungusic peoples developed along the Amur River basin. Their communities spread across a wide expanse of northeastern Asia, from the forests of Siberia to the shores of the Pacific. Among them were numerous smaller groups, each with its own dialect and way of life. Some lived by hunting in dense forests, others by fishing along rivers and coastlines, and still others adapted to reindeer herding in colder regions. Over time, certain groups came under the influence of neighbouring cultures, adopting new languages or customs, while retaining elements of their original identity. The widespread distribution of these peoples can largely be explained by their mobile way of life. Many of them were nomadic, constantly moving across steppe, forest, and tundra in search of resources. Warfare also played a major role in shaping their history. The arrival of steppe warriors in Europe during the age of the Huns marked one of the earliest large-scale movements westward. Even after these campaigns ended, some groups remained behind, forming the ancestors of later populations, such as the Volga Bulgars. In Central Asia, powerful political centres emerged at different times. One important region lay south of Lake Baikal, where early Turkic inscriptions were carved into stone monuments along river valleys. These inscriptions reveal the presence of organised states and ruling elites. Later, the Uyghurs established a flourishing cultural centre in East Turkestan, where trade, agriculture, and religious exchange brought new influences into the region. Contacts with missionaries from the Middle East and China introduced a range of beliefs, including forms of Christianity, Manichaeism, and Buddhism. Religious ideas among these peoples were never static. They evolved through constant interaction with neighbouring civilizations. Persian religious concepts left a deep mark, influencing divine names and mythological figures across Central Asia. Later, Buddhism spread widely among Mongolic groups, especially during periods of political consolidation. At times, it declined and older traditions resurfaced, only to be replaced again in later centuries by new forms of organized belief. Among Turkic groups, Islam gradually became dominant, while in the north, some communities adopted Orthodox Christianity. Despite these changes, older spiritual traditions never disappeared entirely. Shamanistic practices, centered on communication with spirits and the natural world, continued to survive in many regions. In remote forests and tundra, these traditions remained especially strong, shaping everyday life and worldview. Even among communities that formally adopted new religions, older beliefs often persisted beneath the surface, blending into new cultural forms. The way these peoples imagined the world itself reveals a great deal about their thinking. In many traditions, the universe was divided into three layers: the sky above, the earth in the middle, and the underworld below. These realms were not separate but connected by a sacred flow, often symbolized by a great river that linked all levels of existence. For some northern groups, a real river served as this cosmic axis, forming the center of their world and the path along which both spirits and humans could travel. In other traditions, the world was imagined as either a flat circle or a square surface, sometimes even changing shape over time. The sky above was often pictured as a dome resting on the edges of the earth, enclosing the world like a vast shelter. Stories describe heroes traveling to the very edge of this world, where earth and sky meet. In some regions, the sky was thought to consist of multiple layers stacked above one another, each containing its own landscapes, waters, or celestial bodies. These layered heavens were sometimes described as 3, 7, or even 9 levels. The idea likely developed through contact with more complex astronomical systems, but it was adapted into local storytelling in unique ways. In some traditions, the sun and moon occupied different levels of the sky, while others imagined entire landscapes existing above the visible world. Beneath the earth, a similar structure could be found, with multiple descending layers, forming the realm of the dead. A common feature across many of these traditions was the belief that the earth rested upon a vast ocean. This raised an important question. What supports the earth itself? Different cultures offer different answers. Some imagined enormous fish beneath the earth, holding it steady in the cosmic waters. Movements of these creatures were believed to cause natural events such as floods or earthquakes. Others spoke of giant animals such as bulls, carrying the weight of the world on their backs or horns. In certain stories, multiple creatures worked together to support the earth, while in others a single being bore the entire burden. These myths often explained natural disasters as the result of movement or imbalance in these supporting forces. Even in distant regions, similar ideas appeared, suggesting a shared pattern of thought shaped by environment and imagination. Among northern peoples, another explanation emerged. Underground creatures, such as massive beasts, were believed to move beneath the surface, causing the earth to tremble. In some cases, these creatures were linked to real animals known in fossil form, giving rise to myths that connected the natural world with unseen forces beneath it. The daily lives of these peoples were closely tied to their environment. In forest regions, hunting and fishing formed the basis of survival. In the open steppe, pastoral nomadism dominated, with horses and sheep playing a central role. In colder northern areas, reindeer herding became essential. Over time, some groups began to adopt agriculture, especially in more fertile southern regions, leading to new forms of settlement and social organization. Knowledge of these cultures was gradually recorded by travelers and observers from other parts of the world. Accounts from early envoys and explorers describe journeys across vast landscapes, encounters with unfamiliar customs, and observations of religious practices. While these reports provide valuable insights, they often capture only fragments of a much larger and more complex cultural reality. In many older Yakut traditions, the world was not imagined as something that began at a certain moment. The earth was simply there, ancient and unquestioned, and its origin was not always treated as an important subject. Yet across the wider Altaic world, a very different kind of story appears again and again. In these accounts, the beginning of existence is not a formed landscape of plains, forests, and mountains, but an endless expanse of water. Before there was land, before there was any stable ground for people or spirits, there was only a deep and measureless primal sea. This image of a world covered entirely by water is one of the most persistent features in the creation stories of Inner Asia, although each people shaped the next stage of the story in its own way. One of the most widespread versions tells of a being who must dive into the depths and bring up a little bit of earth from beneath the water. That tiny fragment becomes the seed from which the world grows. In one Yakut telling, the great creator moves above the limitless ocean and notices something floating there. It answers when spoken to and says that it dwells on the hidden earth beneath the water. The creator commands it to dive and fetch some of that buried earth. The being disappears into the deep and returns with a morsel of mud. The creator blesses it, places it upon the water, and sits upon it. But the helper is not content. It tries to stretch the new land in a way that would destroy the creator. Instead of breaking, the little patch becomes firmer and wider, spreading over the waters until it begins to resemble a real world. That story already carries a powerful contrast between a force of good and a force of opposition. But the contrast is even sharper in other versions. In another Yakut narrative, the opposing figure is described as the elder brother of Christ, proud, deceitful, and eager to rival divine power. The creator sends him to the bottom of the ocean to fetch sand. He dives once and fails, dives again and fails again, and only on the third attempt succeeds by taking the shape of a swallow, so that he can carry the mud more effectively. The small piece he brings is blessed and immediately becomes the earth, flat and smooth at first. Yet while doing this work, he secretly hides some of the mud in his mouth, hoping to fashion a separate world for himself. The plan fails. The hidden mud swells inside him, and when he is struck, he spits it out. From that expelled earth come the uneven features of the land. Mountains, ridges, rough places that break the first perfect smoothness of the world. Stories of this kind clearly do more than describe creation. They explain why the earth is beautiful and fertile in some places and harsh or dangerous in others. They also preserve a struggle between order and disruption, between the maker of the world and the one who seeks to spoil it. Similar ideas appear far beyond Yakut tradition. In one Altai story, the creator stands over the water unsure of how to begin. Another being appears beside him and claims to know where earth can be found. He dives to the bottom, tears a piece from an undersea mountain, and returns with it. Part he hands over, but part he keeps hidden in his own mouth. When the world is formed, the hidden portion later becomes marshes and bogs. The same pattern returns. The world begins in order, and then something concealed, selfish, or corrupt introduces imperfection into it. Among the Buryats, another variation places a heavenly being in the role of creator while an evil companion offers help. He brings up earth and stones from beneath the water, and the creator scatters them across the ocean's surface, calling the world into being. As payment, the dark helper asks only for enough land to plant his staff. That request seems harmless at first, but once the staff is driven into the ground, all manner of harmful creatures begin to emerge from the hole: snakes, reptiles, and other destructive beings. Creation here is not a single peaceful act. It it is a contested beginning in which the earth is made good, but danger is introduced into it almost immediately. This kind of dualism points toward a long history of religious influence. In many of these stories, good and evil are already present before the earth itself exists. One being promotes life, order, and blessing. The other introduces suffering, death, and corruption. This opposition strongly recalls older Iranian religious thought, in which the world is good in its origin, but is scarred by the work of an adversary. Yet the stories found in Siberia and Central Asia are not simple copies of a formal doctrine. They are living tales, shaped over time by travel, contact, and retelling. Elements from Persian religion, Eastern Christianity, local mythology, and later Buddhist settings all seem to have mixed together until the stories took on the forms in which they are now known. In some of these tales, the opponent of the creator first appears as something floating on the water, a bubble, a patch of foam, or a swelling form with a voice inside it. That image is striking. Evil is not born on solid ground because no solid ground yet exists. It rises instead from the same watery chaos out of which the world itself must be drawn. In certain Altai traditions, the creator sees a lump of mud floating with something human about it. He gives it spirit and life, and from it comes a being who is at first close to the creator, almost a companion, but later becomes his enemy. In many versions, this being is called the first man, though he eventually transforms into the ruler of the underworld and the master of the dead. That detail is important, because it links the story of creation to the story of death. The one who opposes the making of the earth becomes, in the end, lord of the realm beneath it. Elsewhere, the same figure remains closer to the world of sectarian religious legend. In some traditions, he is openly called the elder brother of Christ. In others, he is simply the creator's brother, born from the same source, yet driven by envy and pride. The idea that two great beings emerge side by side, one good and one evil, appears in various religious systems across Eurasia. But once this idea enters oral tradition, it becomes more flexible. The names may change, the setting may shift, and the theology may blur, but the dramatic structure remains the same. The world begins with tension already present. Another fascinating detail is the shape taken by the Earthbringer. Sometimes the helper dives in human form. Sometimes he transforms into a swallow. Quite often, however, he becomes a water bird. That is a far more natural choice because a diving bird belongs to the water and can reach beneath its surface. In some Altaic stories, both the creator and his rival move over the primordial ocean in bird form, often as black geese. At one moment, the proud companion tries to rise higher than the creator and then falls into the depths, nearly drowning before being saved. Later, the same being is sent down to fetch earth from below the water. The creator scatters that earth on the ocean and the world begins to spread. But again, the rival hides some of the mud in his mouth, hoping to create something for himself. The secret mud swells as the earth grows, and he is forced to spit it out, producing the wet and unpleasant places of the land. Bird imagery appears in many northern versions of the story, and even where the earth diver still behaves like a person, traces of the older bird form remain. A being may be said to have hands and human intention, yet also feathers, a beak, or the ability to swim and dive like a loon, duck, or goose. In Vogel traditions, the diver may even put on the skin of a water bird in order to descend into the deep. This suggests that an older and simpler form of the story may have centered not on a devilish rival at all, but on an ordinary water bird sent to bring up the first mud. That older layer becomes clearer in stories when no evil opponent appears. Among the Yenisei Ostiaks, the world begins when a great sacred figure hovers above the waters, with swans, loons, and other birds. Finding nowhere to rest, he asks a diving bird to bring up some earth. The bird fails more than once, but eventually returns with a little mud in its beak. From this small amount, an island is made. In Buryat stories, a white diving bird is sent beneath the waters to fetch black soil and red clay. The two substances are scattered across the surface of the sea and together form a living world on which plants soon begin to grow. In another telling, the bird is blessed for its service and granted the power to swim and dive forever with great skill. Here, there is no plot of rebellion, no hidden mud, no devil trying to outwit the creator. There is only the challenge of obtaining earth from beneath the waters and the wonder of land beginning to emerge. A northern Yakut version also preserves this quieter style of creation, though later religious language has entered the tale. A holy female figure decides to make the world and first creates two birds, a diver and a duck, ordering them to bring up mud from the bottom of the ocean. The duck succeeds, the diver fails and is punished for deceit or laziness, condemned to spend its life in the water searching among the depths. The mud brought up by the successful bird is used to make the earth, which is placed upon the sea like a floating island and gradually grows into a great inhabited world. Even in altered form, the structure is simple and ancient. The world must be fetched before it can be built. Some versions add small episodes that reveal how stories were blended and expanded over time. In one Buryat tale, the bird diving for earth is challenged by a crab in the depths. The crab claims to know the sea well and insists that no bottom exists. Only after receiving sacred words is the bird able to continue and succeed. Among the Votiacs, a similar scene appears, but there it is inserted into a more strongly dualistic tale in which a malicious being later hides earth and causes mountains to appear. This suggests that an older nature-centered story and a later good versus evil story may have merged. When the simpler tales are set beside the more dramatic ones, a likely pattern emerges. The oldest form may have involved a creator and a bird or water animal diving for earth in a world covered by water. Later, under the influence of dualistic religion, the diver became an opponent, a deceiver, or a devil-like figure. That would explain why even the devil in many versions still behaves partly like a bird. The strange mixture makes sense only if an older bird diver tradition existed first. This interpretation becomes even more persuasive when similar stories are found far beyond Central Asia. Many indigenous traditions in North America tell of a primordial ocean, a small group of beings surviving on the water and an animal sent beneath the waves to fetch mud. Sometimes it is a bird, sometimes a fish, sometimes a muskrat, or another water creature. The mud brought up from below is placed on the surface and grows into the world. In some stories, an animal is later sent to run around the expanding land in order to measure how large it has become. A very similar image appears in northern Eurasia, where a bird is sent out day after day, and its longer absences show that the Earth is expanding. Another important figure shared across continents is the turtle. In several North American stories, the Earth is formed on the back of a great turtle, floating on the primal waters. In Central Asia, there are tales in which a turtle is turned over, and the world is built upon it, or in which a divine being sits upon the turtle, while an assistant dives for mud. In later Buddhist versions, the creator himself may become a gigantic turtle, supporting the Earth on the waters. These parallels do not necessarily mean direct borrowing in every detail, but they show how deeply rooted the image of the world resting on an animal could become. The turtle motif also leads towards South Asia, where very old traditions speak of creation from a primeval sea and of the earth being raised or supported by divine beings in animal form. In India, the creator may take the shape of a turtle and bring up mud from beneath the waters, forming the earth from it as it rapidly expands. Later, religious traditions replace older deities with more developed sacred figures, but the underlying image remains. Among the ancient civilizations of Asia, India is the one place where this type of earth diver creation appears in very old layers of tradition. That makes it especially important for understanding how such tales may have spread across Central Asia and beyond. Not all Altaic creation stories depend on diving for earth. Some describe the appearance of land in entirely different ways. One Mongolian story, shaped by Buddhist imagination, tells of a holy man descending from heaven and stirring the waters with an iron staff. Wind and fire are set in motion, and through their action the surface of the sea thickens until it hardens into land. The earth here is not fetched from below, but condensed from the waters themselves. A similar image appears in East Asia, where a divine being stirs the chaos with a staff, and droplets falling from it become islands. A Tungus tale offers yet another version. In the beginning, there is only water, and fire is sent into it. Gradually, the fire overcomes part of the sea, drying and hardening it until land and sea take their present forms. This story too contains a struggle between a divine creator and an opposing power who wants to fashion a separate world. Their rivalry continues through contests of power, including the attempt to command a tree to rise from the water. The details have clearly been coloured by outside influence, but the underlying thought is striking. Land can emerge when heat defeats water. Other traditions imagine the beginning as a chaos made from several primal elements. Fire, water, and wind exist together before the world takes shape. A sacred teacher separates them, and from what is left behind, dust, vapour, residue, the earth is formed and spread over the waters. Some Mongolian stories also preserve a different cosmological image, one in which heaven and earth were once joined and only later became separate. When they parted, the visible order of the world appeared, including the lights of the sky. This idea is closely linked to broader Asian traditions, in which heaven and earth come from the splitting of a cosmic whole. Among some northern Siberian peoples, the earth is not formed on the waters at all, but lowered from heaven. In Vogel tales, a deity lets down a disk of earth from above as a dwelling place for humankind. In Kamchatka, a heavenly being brings down the earth and sets it on the surface of the ocean. These stories still assume the existence of the primal water, but they shift the emphasis from emergence to descent. The world is not gathered from below. It is delivered from above. And yet, against all these ocean-centered myths, there is another voice from the steppe. Among the Kyrgyz, one story says that in the beginning there was no water at all. Two beings cared for a great ox and suffered from terrible thirst. In response, the ox dug into the earth with its mighty horns, and from those wounds came lakes and rivers. That version belongs to a very different landscape and a different kind of life. It reflects the imagination of inland pastoral people for whom water is precious, not because it covers the world, but because it is absent and must be found. Taken as a whole, these creation stories do not appear to have originated among the Altaic peoples themselves. They carry too many ideas, symbols, and religious layers that clearly came from elsewhere. The older and more deeply rooted belief was probably much simpler. The world had always existed. For many steppe and forest peoples, the earth wasn't something that needed a dramatic beginning. It was simply there, ancient, familiar, and already woven into the order of life. That does not mean these communities lacked imagination about the shape of the land around them. On the contrary, they preserved many local stories that tried to explain why the earth looked the way it did, why mountains rose where they did, why valleys opened beneath the feet of men, and why rivers cut across the land. Among the northern peoples of Siberia, one of the most striking of these local explanations, centered on the mammoth. Great bones and tusks were often found buried in the frozen ground, and such remains could hardly be ignored. To people living close to the tundra and forest edge, these hidden relics belong to a vast and powerful creature that must once have moved beneath or across the earth. It was said that the world had once been smooth, level, and unbroken, but the mammoth ruined that original flatness with its enormous horns. The mountains and the deep gashes in the land were believed to be the marks of its violence. Even the low places, hollows, and sunken stretches of ground were explained through the movement of this giant beast. When it walked, the earth shook under its weight, sinking here and cracking there. Water later gathered in these depressions, and from them came lakes, marshes, and rivers. In the end, the creature's power became too destructive. The creator, angered by the harm it had done, drowned it in a lake, where it was believed to remain hidden below the ground. Another northern tale explains the same rough landscape in a very different way. In this version, the creator first lived in the sky and only later came down to earth. When he began to move across the land on skis, the earth beneath him was still soft and yielding, like thin, new ice bending under weight. As he travelled, the surface sagged and folded. That is why the world is uneven, why ridges rise and basins sink, and why no plane stays perfectly flat for long. This is not the language of theology or imported cosmology. It is the language of people watching a land of snow, ice and pressure and explaining its shapes through images drawn from daily life. From such local stories about the landscape, it is possible to move into a far larger vision of the universe. One built not only around the earth itself but around the sky above it. Among many peoples of the north, the regular movement of the stars gave rise to one of the most powerful cosmological ideas of all. Night after night, the heavens appeared to revolve around a fixed point in the north, and it seemed impossible that this constant turning could happen without some support, some axis, some central structure around which the whole sky moved. From that observation grew the idea of the world pillar, the great post at the centre of the heavens, standing beneath the northern sky and holding up the vault above the earth. This belief took many names, but the meaning remained remarkably consistent across a vast region. Among Mongolic peoples and several Turkic groups, the star at the centre of the heavens was imagined as a golden pillar, an iron pillar, a solitary post, or a shining support. Such names were not poetic accidents. They reveal a concrete image of the cosmos in which the northern sky was not empty space but a great structure with a visible centre. The pole star was not merely a bright point. It marked the place where the sky was fastened, upheld, or anchored. The widespread similarity of these names suggests that the belief itself must have been very old, reaching back to an early stage in the shared imagination of inner Asian peoples. Among some northern communities, this cosmic support was not only described in stories, but also represented in ritual life. Wooden pillars were raised in villages and treated with reverence. In certain places, they were little more than upright posts set into the ground, but they were approached as sacred objects, given offerings, and spoken to in prayer. Sacrifices were made at their base in hopes of prosperity, increase in herds, success in labour, and health for the household. These posts were not ordinary stakes for tying animals, even if they sometimes served that outward purpose. They were understood as earthly images of the great support at the centre of the universe. Some of these ritual pillars were plain, but others carried remarkable features. In parts of northwestern Siberia, wooden birds were fixed at the top, and in some cases these birds even had two heads. The people themselves no longer always knew what the bird signified, but the image must once have had meaning. It may have represented a lordly bird of the upper world, a guardian of the cosmic axis. or a messenger moving between sky and earth. The pillars beneath these birds were sometimes said to be the unfailing supports before the dwelling of the highest god. Their crosspieces were imagined as places where divine sons or heavenly beings sat. The entire structure turned the post into a model of the upper world. The sky that this pillar held up was not imagined as an abstract expanse. It was pictured as a roof, a stretched covering, something like the tent roof or skin roof familiar from everyday dwellings. That image appears again and again across northern and central Asia. Some describe the sky as tightly stretched layers, one above another. Others spoke of seams in the heavens, as though the sky had been sewn together like a great covering of hide or cloth. The Milky Way itself could be understood as a stitched seam running across the upper world. Sometimes a crack or opening in that sky roof would appear for an instant, and through it, divine light shone down. Meteors were interpreted in this way. When a bright streak flashed across the sky, it was said that the heavenly cover had briefly opened, allowing a glimpse of the light beyond. Such moments were considered powerful. Anyone who saw them might make a wish or speak a prayer, trusting that the opening in heaven made it especially likely to be heard. If the sky was a great roof spread over the earth, then the stars themselves could easily be understood as holes in that covering. Certain clusters were thought more dangerous than others. Through some openings, cold winds or deadly frost could pour down into the world. In this way, the night sky became not merely a pattern of lights, but a structured and vulnerable canopy over life below. It reflected the imagination of peoples whose own houses taught them how shelter works, and how openings in a roof can either bring blessing or danger. There was, however, another way of understanding the pillar at the northern sky. It was not only a support for the heavens, it could also be seen as the tethering post of the stars. Since the stars seemed to circle endlessly around the pole, it was natural to imagine them as animals bound to a central stake. For steppe peoples whose lives revolved around horses, herds, and camp arrangements, this image was especially powerful. The sky became a great encampment, and the pole star became the post to which heavenly horses were tied. Among some peoples, the cosmic pillar was directly called the horse post of the sky. Stories told of divine smiths who fixed it in place and turned the northern heavens into a celestial enclosure. Before the tents or dwellings of the gods stood a golden or iron tethering post, just as before the tents of nomads on earth. This same image spread beyond strictly Turkic groups. Among the peoples of western Siberia, tales speak of a holy iron or stone pillar created by the heavenly god and set before his dwelling. Through an iron ring or loop attached to it, a divine animal might be tied. Elsewhere, it was said that the Son of Heaven fastened his steed there before visiting his father. All this suggests a deep connection between the motion of the stars, the arrangement of camp life, and the structure of the universe. The heavens were not imagined as alien or abstract, they were built from images taken from daily reality. In some traditions, the pillar was not simply one post, but a pillar divided into levels. Among certain Ugric peoples, sacred posts were spoken of as 7-part or 7-marked. Ritual poles might have 7 cuts, 7 notches, or 7 stumps of branches. Prayers addressed to the deity of the pillar also referred to this 7-fold structure. Sacrificial animals were sometimes tied to the post in groups of 7, and a fixed series of vows or ritual acts was performed there. This number was clearly not accidental. It reflected a larger cosmology in which the sky itself was imagined as layered. The 7 divisions of the post represented the 7 levels of heaven. Sometimes the cosmic pillar began to merge with another image altogether, the world tree. In certain ritual settings, especially in shamanic practice, a tree rather than a plain post was raised at the center of a sacred space. Along its trunk were cut a series of steps or notches. During a ceremony, the shaman climbed upward from one notch to the next, symbolically passing through the levels of the sky. In some regions, there were 9 levels rather than 7, and the ritual tree reflected that greater number. This tree stood at the center of the tent, or ritual enclosure, with its upper part reaching toward or through the opening above. In that moment, the tree, the pillar, and the axis of heaven all became one. From there, the imagination of Inner Asia moved naturally toward another immense image, the world mountain. Across the Mongolic world, stories spoke of a vast central mountain standing at the middle of existence. Its name varied slightly from one people to another, but its identity was clear. This was no ordinary mountain tied to one particular landscape. It was a cosmic mountain, the central height of the earth, the place where heaven and the world below came closest together. According to some stories, it had not always been immense. In the beginning, it may have been no more than a small rise, a hill that grew as the world grew, but in later imagination its peak became unreachable, a place fit only for the gods. This mountain was not originally a native landscape feature elevated into myth. It arrived already bound to a developed cosmology. That is clear from its name and from the ideas attached to it, many of which came from India, Iran, and the wider religious world of Asia. Among some groups, it was said that the high god lived upon a golden mountain in heaven. Elsewhere, the mountain itself was imagined in multiple levels, rising in stages equal to the layered heavens above. In certain traditions, the sky itself became mountain-like, a rounded arch or solid height beneath which the world was sheltered. Some stories even describe the heavens as made of stone, supported or hidden by air so that their crushing weight would not fall directly upon the earth. The central mountain was often located in the far north, directly beneath the pole star. On its summit stood the throne of the highest god, or a temple whose spire was identified with the northern star itself. This made perfect sense within the old cosmology. If the sky turned around a fixed center in the north, then the highest mountain of the world should rise there as well, touching the point where the universe was fastened. This mountain was not only central in space, it was central in power, serving as the meeting place of heaven, the seat of divine rule, and the axis around which the cosmos was ordered. Different streams of civilization shaped the image in different ways. Among Mongolic and Buddhist peoples, the world mountain came in a highly developed sacred geography. Among Turkic groups, similar ideas arrived through Persian channels and merged with older beliefs about heaven, gods, and sacred heights. In distant northern Europe, echoes of the same logic appear in tales of heaven mountains and peaks, rising at the navel of the sky. The forms differ, but the structure of the idea remains astonishingly similar. In some accounts, the world mountain stood in the middle of a vast ocean. At times, it existed even before the inhabited Earth came into being. Around it spread the cosmic waters, and beneath those waters lived monstrous beings that threatened life itself. One of the most dramatic stories tells of a giant serpent dwelling in the sea beneath the earth. This creature rose from the deep and poisoned the world, attacking men and animals from below. A heavenly hero was sent against it, but could not defeat it in ordinary form. Only by ascending the world mountain and taking on the shape of a mighty celestial bird could he finally overcome the sea monster. The serpent's body was so vast that it could coil around the mountain again and again, while its tail still trailed in the ocean below. This image too belongs to a broad mythic family spread across Asia, and even into Europe, where sea serpents and world-encircling dragons appear in related roles. The most elaborate form of this cosmology appears in the Buddhist world, picture that spread through Tibet, Mongolia, and neighbouring lands. In that vision, the central mountain rises from the cosmic ocean to an almost unimaginable height. Around it stand 7 concentric mountain ranges separated by 7 circular seas. Beyond them lies a great salt ocean, and around that ocean an outer ring of iron mountains marks the very boundary of the world. The central mountain itself is broad below and narrower above, like a vast sacred height cut into geometric form. Each of its sides shines in a different colour: blue, red, yellow, and white, and these colours are reflected in the quarters of the world around it. For that reason, the directions themselves take on colour identities. South becomes blue, west red, north yellow, east white, or in other traditions different colour systems are used for the same fourfold order. Within the outer ocean lie 4 great continents, one in each direction, accompanied by smaller lands beside them. The inhabitants of these regions differ from one another in appearance, and even the shapes of the continents reflect symbolic patterns rather than geography. This is not a map of the physical world. It is a sacred arrangement of space, a vision of reality ordered by number, symmetry, direction, colour, and divine centrality. The 12 lands surrounding the centre also echo the old idea that the sky above and the world below reflect one another, and that the ordered heavens must have an ordered counterpart on earth. At the very centre of existence, at what many Altaic traditions call the navel of the earth, there stands a tree unlike any other in the world. It is not simply large, ancient, or sacred. It is the highest of all earthly trees, a vast shining fir or birch, whose top reaches into the upper world, toward the dwelling of the supreme sky god. In some stories, it rises from the middle of the world itself. In others, it grows from a mountain placed at the centre of the earth. Sometimes that mountain is described as iron, sometimes as the great cosmic height that lifts its summit into the heavens. Wherever the setting changes, the meaning remains the same. This tree belongs to the structure of the universe. It is not part of the landscape in any ordinary sense. It stands where the worlds meet. Earlier traditions often placed this mighty tree upon the great central mountain known in Inner Asian cosmology. But in many later tellings, the mountain fades into the background, and the tree takes its place as the main axis of creation. It rises from the centre of the earth itself, and because the central mountain was often imagined as reaching into the layered sky, the tree too could be lifted upward until it became partly a being of heaven. Its roots might still hold the depths below, but its crown belongs above. In some traditions, it passes through the levels of the heavens one by one, as if the sky had been built around it. In others, it stands so high that its top becomes a resting place for the gods. Like the world pillar, it can also serve as a divine tethering post, a place where heavenly steeds are fastened. In this way, the world tree and the world pillar are closely related. Both stand at the cosmic centre. Both tie together heaven, earth, and the underworld. But the tree has one quality the pillar does not. It is alive. That living quality defines it. This cosmic tree is always fresh, full of sap, nourished by hidden waters, and marked by a power that renews everything around it. It is never described as dry, dead, or still. It grows beside springs, lakes, or vast central waters. Some tales place it at the edge of a sea in the middle of the sky. Others describe a life-giving basin at its roots, a spring from which the waters of vitality rise. In one old poetic vision, a golden-leaved birch stands on a high mountain, piercing the heavens, while beneath it lies a basin filled with the water of life. Beside that basin rests a golden ladle, waiting as if someone might drink from it. The image is rich and strangely quiet. A luminous tree, a sacred vessel, and the promise that life, strength, and blessing are stored at the center of the world. This same sacred pattern appears in other traditions as well. Among peoples farther west, there are tales of a giant birch whose roots circle the earth and whose branches surround the sky. At its foot is a spring covered with cloth and boards, and beside the water stands a vessel filled with a sweet drink. A silver ladle lies within it, decorated with heavenly symbols, and as the sun moves across the sky, the handle of the ladle turns with it. The tree is not merely near the source of life. It is bound to the motion of the heavens themselves. It stands as a meeting place of cosmic order, sacred nourishment, and divine time. In Yakut tradition, the tree becomes even more vivid. There it stands on the yellow navel of the many-sided earth, dense, towering, and branching in all directions. Its bark shines like silver. Its sap glows like gold. Its cones resemble precious vessels, and its leaves are so large that they are compared to the hide of a horse. From the crown there flows a foaming heavenly liquid, pale and nourishing. Anyone who drinks it finds hunger gone, thirst ended, and weariness washed away. This is not just a sacred tree, it is a source of direct renewal. It satisfies the body, restores strength, and seems to erase weakness itself. Because of this, the tree becomes more than a cosmic symbol. It becomes the center of blessed existence, the place where the first human appears and where life begins in a state of harmony. In Yakut narratives, the first man is closely linked to this tree. He does not discover it far away after long wandering. He finds himself already within its sphere, almost as if he belongs to it. In one version, when he wonders why he has been created and what purpose his existence serves, he approaches the giant tree whose crown rises through the heavens and whose branches pour down a bright, nourishing fluid. As he stands before it, an opening appears in the trunk. From within emerges a female figure, visible only to the waist, who tells him that he has been created to become the ancestor of humankind. The tree does not merely witness the beginning of humanity. It reveals it. A longer version gives the scene even greater depth. The first man appears alone in a central land untouched by winter. A place where the moon never seems to fade, the sun never seems to sink, and the air carries the timeless calm of an ideal world. He sees a mighty tree rising from a hill in the eastern plain, vast beyond measure. Its resin is fragrant and clear, its bark never cracks, its silver sap shines softly, its leaves never wither, its crown reaches beyond the heavens, while its roots sink down into the dark depths below, where they serve as supports for the strange beings of the underworld. Through its leaves, the tree seems to speak with the powers above. It is not only rooted in all realms, it communicates between them. The landscape surrounding it carries the marks of paradise. To one side lies a still lake of milk, calm and unstirred. Elsewhere stands a dark forest, alive with hidden creatures. In the distance rise high mountains capped in white, leaning against the heavens like barriers against the northern cold. Bushes, fir forests, grassy plains and silent expanses complete the world into which the first man opens his eyes. Yet despite all this beauty, he is alone, and it is loneliness that leads him toward the tree. He speaks to the spirit of the place with humility, asking for blessing, companionship, destiny, and a life suited to a human being. In response, the tree stirs. Its leaves rustle. A fine pale rain falls from its branches. Warm air moves through the stillness. Then, from beneath the roots, there rises a female being, half hidden in the earth, a grave and powerful spirit of the tree itself. She is maternal, solemn, and deeply connected to the place. She nurses the first man with milk from her breast, and through that act his strength increases beyond measure. She blesses him against danger, promising that neither fire, water, iron, nor any other force will easily destroy him. The meaning is unmistakable. The tree is not only a source of life in a general sense, it is a place of nurture, empowerment, and consecration. The spirit living within it acts like a mother, a guardian, and a goddess of fate all at once. Through her, the tree becomes a birthplace of civilization, heroism, and human destiny. This is one of the clearest signs that the story, in its deepest form, did not arise in the cold northern world where the Yakuts later preserved it. The imagery is too lush, too fertile, too deeply shaped by the memory of rich vegetation, sweet sap, eternal summer, and distant snow-covered peaks, seen from a land of abundance below. It belongs to a world where paradise could be imagined through overflowing life rather than mere survival. The Yakut version preserved it beautifully, but its roots must reach much farther south, into older cultural worlds, where sacred mountains, life trees, and heavenly waters had already become central mythic ideas. Other Yakut materials add more details. There, the first man is called the Lonely One, the ancestor who lives in a splendid dwelling at the centre of the plain, a house shining with silver corners, many windows, many pillars, and multiple roof levels. Before this dwelling stands the king of trees, ancient beyond counting. Its roots pass through the underworld and its crown reaches through the 9 heavens. Its leaves and cones are immense. Under its roots foams the eternal water. Old cattle, worn animals, and tired game, whether running or flying, regain youth and fullness when they drink the sap and resin flowing down from its branches. Everything living is restored by contact with this tree. Even age and exhaustion are not final in its presence. The spirit within it remains just as striking. She is sometimes imagined as old and white-haired, with a strange body marked like a bird and great nourishing breasts. When she comes forth, the tree itself seems to shrink and groan, as though her presence and the tree's life are one and the same. When she re-enters it, the tree regains its former shape. She tells the hero of his heavenly father and mother, reveals his origin, and gives him a vessel filled with sacred liquid to be kept for a moment of extreme danger. Later, when he is struck down in combat by a monstrous enemy, that vessel bursts and its liquid pours over the wound, healing him at once and restoring his strength many times over. The tree's water does not simply refresh, it saves life from death. This entire complex belongs to a very ancient and very widespread family of myths. Comparable ideas appear in the old civilizations of the Near East, in Iran, in India, and in Egypt. Sacred literature from the ancient Semitic world speaks of a tree of life standing at the center of a divine garden, beside the first human beings, and associated with a river or source of life-giving water. It is linked not only with nourishment, but with immortality and healing. That is already enough to show that the Yakut material belongs to a much older and wider inheritance than anything that could have developed in isolation in the far north. The same is true of the mountain setting. Just as the Altaic traditions often place the life tree upon a central height or even in heaven, older Near Eastern traditions also locate paradise on a sacred mountain. A mountain of the gods, a tree of life, and a spring or river of vitality belong together as parts of one cosmological vision. The central mountain, the sacred tree, and the water below it are not separate symbols. They form one image of perfect order at the center of the world. Indian tradition preserves another branch of this same ancient pattern. In one inner Asian tale shaped by Buddhist influence, there is first only water and 2 great mountains. On one mountain stand divine temples inhabited by 33 gods. At the foot of that height rises the great life tree, known by a name closely connected to old Indian sacred geography. The gods feed on its fruit, while the beings below the mountain rage that the tree grows on their land. Conflict begins, and from that divine struggle, the earth itself is eventually formed. In this setting, the life tree is not simply decorative. It is the nourishment of gods and the center of cosmic tension. The mountain, the tree, the divine assembly, and the hostile powers beneath all belong to the same mythic architecture. In Indian sacred imagination, the life tree is lavishly described. It has great branches, fine shining leaves, golden blossoms, and fruit capable of driving away disease. Sweet sap drips from it like liquid richness. Those who live near it are sustained by it. Such ideas are clearly related to the broader Eurasian image of a tree that nourishes all beings and stands at the world's center. Other Indian traditions speak of sacred plants or divine substances of immortality associated with mountains and birds of heaven. Iranian mythology offers something similar in its own form. A life-giving tree placed on the world mountain, connected to the water of life and to paradise itself. In both cases, the pattern is unmistakable. Yet the Yakut version also preserves details that feel closer to some older images from still farther west. In Egyptian sacred art, there are images of a date palm that is partly tree and partly woman, offering nourishing liquid to those who come before it. Here again, the tree and the feminine life-giving presence are fused into one being. That same fusion appears powerfully in the Yakut tree spirit, who is at once mother, guardian, and embodiment of the tree's blessing. The connection is not one of exact borrowing from a single source. It is part of a long family of ideas in which the tree of life is both plant and presence, both axis and mother. Even the old northern traditions of Europe preserve related images. In the Norse world, the great world tree stretches over the earth and the heavens, with a life-giving fluid beneath it and divine female beings dwelling near its roots. A great bird sits in its crown, while a destructive serpent lurks below. The resemblances to Inner Asian and Yakut images are too close to ignore. At the foot of the Central Asian life tree too, there are serpents or dragons waiting in sacred waters, while in its crown lives a mighty bird. The great eagle of Indian myth, the heavenly bird that opposes the serpent powers, appears in Inner Asian stories under forms that clearly descend from the old Garuda tradition. The serpent below and the bird above turn the tree into a vertical battlefield as well as a source of life. It links not only heaven and earth, but blessing and danger, renewal and threat. These connections suggest that the Yakut life tree, despite its northern form, is best understood as a distant heir to the paradise traditions of the ancient Iranian and wider Near Eastern world. In Iranian thought, the world mountain is sometimes described as iron, and on its summit stands the tree of life beside the spring of living water. There too the first man belongs to the sacred center, and there too the first human is imagined in shining or white terms. This makes it likely that the tale travelled gradually eastward, with waves of cultural contact, passed through Turkic and Inner Asian traditions, and was eventually carried as far as the Lena region, where the Yakuts preserved it with astonishing richness. What makes the Yakut material especially valuable is that it preserves not only the tree as symbol, but the tree as the true center of all living existence. The first man is not alone there. All animals belong to that place as well. Cattle, wild creatures, birds, and fish are all under the care of the spirit who dwells in the tree. She is thanked not only for bringing up the first human, but for tending the flocks, protecting the beasts, gathering the birds, and watching over the creatures of the waters. The life tree is therefore not merely a source of immortality for heroes. It is the nourishing center of creation as a whole. That role may once have been even greater. Some variants strongly suggest that the spirit of the tree is not only the nourisher of the first man, but in some sense his true mother. Although another layer of the story says that he was born in heaven and lowered down to earth, the hero himself reasons differently. He examines his own condition and concludes that he has not fallen from above, nor come from any direction across the earth, nor risen from the ground. He bears no marks of travel, snow, dust, or landscape. The implication is clear. He belongs to the place where he finds himself. He has come into being in the immediate presence of the tree, almost as though born from its sacred surroundings or from the goddess hidden within it. That is why he speaks to the spirit of the tree as both creator and mother. He asks her to be the one who bore him and formed him. Her care has already raised him from helplessness to maturity. Her milk has strengthened him. Her blessing has prepared his future. Everything in the story points back to her as the feminine life force at the heart of the world. Around her stands the tree. Beneath her flows the life-giving water. Above her rises the path to heaven. Through her, life first becomes possible. Beneath the tree there is always water. Sometimes it is a spring under the roots. Sometimes the sap of the tree itself is so abundant that it forms a stream. In Iranian tradition, all rivers of the earth can be imagined as beginning from the spring beneath the tree of life. In other versions, the tree rises from the middle of a sacred lake or sea whose waters possess extraordinary qualities. Among the Kalmucks, the great life tree rises from a central sea composed of wondrous elements, and from that sea flow 4 mighty rivers toward the 4 directions of the earth. Each turns repeatedly before returning to its source. As they travel, they gather waters from countless tributaries and carry with them the substances and colours associated with the central mountain. These rivers emerge through animal-shaped openings, linked with the directions of the world. Each direction has its own creature, its own colour, and its own sacred identity. This is part of an old Asian cosmological system in which the quarters of the world are not only geographical. They are symbolic, living, and ordered by divine design. The rivers flowing from the centre spread that order outward. They carry the wealth of the cosmic mountain across the world. In this way, the tree, the central waters, the mountain, the 4 directions, and the living creatures of creation all form one great design. In the old cosmologies of Inner Asia, the earth was never thought to rest in complete safety. Even if the sky remained aloft on its pillar and the great central supports of the world still held, other dangers always threatened the land of human beings. Once the earth was imagined as floating on, or resting above, a vast cosmic sea, another fear naturally followed. The foundations of the world might fail, the waters might rise, and everything living might be swallowed. Across Asia, stories grew around that fear. They told of an age when the world had already once been overwhelmed by a flood so immense that nearly all life was destroyed, and only a single survivor, or a small remnant, lived on to begin humanity again. Among the Altaic peoples, tales of this kind were also known, though in the forms that survive today, they bear the marks of later religious influence rather than purely local origin. Older versions may once have existed, but the more recent currents of belief seem to have reshaped or replaced them. One of the most widespread forms appears in Buryat tradition. In that story, before the great flood arrived, a divine being warns a certain man to build a large vessel. He obeys and begins to work in the forest, day after day, cutting timber and shaping the ship in secret. His wife, seeing his long absences and strange behaviour, becomes suspicious and wants to know what he is doing. He avoids telling her the truth. But then an evil being comes to her and reveals that her husband is not merely cutting wood. He is building a great ship because a flood is coming. The tempter then teaches her exactly how to help him. When the ship is finished, and her husband urges her to board it, she must refuse again and again. When his patience breaks and he strikes her in anger, she is to speak the evil one's name. By doing so, she will allow him to enter the ship with her. The plan works. As the waters rise and the man gathers his family aboard, the wife delays until her husband loses his temper. When she finally speaks the words she was taught, the evil being slips into the vessel along with her. The story continues with a familiar image of rescue. The builder of the ship is helped in gathering animals of every kind so that life may continue after the waters fall. Yet one great beast, proud and confident in its own strength, refuses to enter, believing that no flood could overcome it. That arrogance proves fatal. While the waters wipe out every creature left outside, the intruding enemy inside the ship changes form, becomes a mouse, and begins gnawing holes in the vessel from below, threatening to sink it from within. To counter this, divine help produces the cat, whose task is to stop the destroyer before the vessel is lost. In the end, the proud beast that refused safety is drowned, and people later explain the huge bones buried in the earth as the remains of that ancient animal. In some tellings, the drowned creature is not simply a giant beast of legend, but the mammoth itself. Among the Sagai, a closely related version survives, though with important differences. Here, the flood hero is called by a name unmistakably shaped by the biblical Noah. Again, his wife becomes the weak point through which the enemy works. The devil persuades her to discover what her husband is building in the forest. Once the secret is learned, the destroyer goes further and begins undoing by night what the man builds by day. By the time the flood arrives, the vessel is not fully complete. Only a final intervention from above saves the family, providing an iron ship in which the righteous man, his household, and the animals survive. In both versions, the drama depends on a contrast between divine warning and demonic interference, between preparation and sabotage, between obedience and the dangerous curiosity of the wife. The pattern is difficult to miss. These stories clearly stand close to the biblical flood narrative, but they also contain additional motifs that do not come directly from the Bible itself. The role of the wife is especially striking. She is not simply present as part of the rescued family. She becomes the opening through which the force of destruction tries to invade the Ark. In some traditions of Western Siberia, the devil does not merely speak to her. He gives her a strong drink and uses intoxication to draw the secret from her husband. This detail appears farther west as well, in later Eastern Christian legendary traditions. There too, the flood hero is tricked into revealing what God had told him to keep hidden. The enemy then enters the Ark through the wife's involvement, and once inside, takes the form of a mouse and gnaws at the bottom of the vessel. This is already far removed from the simple biblical story and belongs to a later layer of religious storytelling in which apocryphal imagination has merged with oral legend. Another clue points toward Islamic storytelling. In a famous Muslim tale, the devil manages to enter Noah's Ark because Noah, frustrated at a reluctant animal, calls it accursed, and the evil one answers that no creature deserves that title more than he does. That theme of the devil entering only when summoned by spoken words is close in spirit to the Altaic versions where the wife speaks the name that grants access. Yet the Siberian tales do not look like direct borrowings from Islam alone. Rather, they seem to belong to a broader mixed zone where biblical, apocryphal, Eastern Christian, and perhaps other Near Eastern traditions all passed into oral circulation and took new forms. There is, however, another Altaic flood narrative that differs noticeably from these strongly dualistic stories. In this version, the flood hero is a good and aged man whose name again echoes familiar sacred tradition, though the setting has become thoroughly inner Asian. The ruler of the sea dominates the world before the flood, and the hero is instructed by the high god to build an ark. He entrusts much of the physical labour to his sons, since age has weakened his sight. The ark is built on a mountain, and when it is finished, ropes are fastened from its corners and sides down to the earth below. These ropes are measured carefully so that the old man can judge how high the waters rise as the flood begins. After 7 days, the cords attached to the ground snap, showing that the flood has already risen to a fearful level. 7 days later, his son looks out and sees only mountain tops, still visible above the waters. Later, even these disappear, and all that remains is sky and flood. Eventually, the vessel grounds on a group of mountains. Then the old man opens a window and sends out birds one after another. First goes the raven, then the crow, then another dark bird, and none of them return. At last, the dove is released, and it comes back with a birch twig in its beak, bringing the first sign that dry land has reappeared. But the story does not end there. The flood hero asks why the earlier birds never came back, and the answer is grimly practical. Each had found the body of some drowned animal and stopped to feed. Angered by their greed, he curses them, condemning them to remain scavengers as long as the world lasts. The ending of the tale turns in yet another unexpected direction. In old age, the flood hero is urged by his wife to kill the very humans and animals he has saved, so that in the next world all of them will belong under his control. Her counsel is wicked, but it is opposed indirectly. A son tells his father a strange little story about a dark cow devouring a human being, leaving only the legs visible. The old man understands the warning hidden in the image and kills his wife instead. Finally, he departs to heaven and takes the son with him, transforming him into a constellation in the sky. This version lacks the elaborate Mouse in the Ark episode and much of the sharper demonic drama. But once again, the wife appears as a dangerous and destructive figure. It also shows how deeply the flood hero could be absorbed into Altaic religious imagination. He does not remain only a survivor of catastrophe. In some places, he becomes a heavenly being in his own right, a protector, mediator, and recipient of sacrifice. Among Altai groups, the Flood Lord is worshipped under a princely title. He receives prayers as an intercessor between human beings and the highest god, and at certain times of year a white animal may be offered to him on a mountain height. He is also connected with death, the souls of the departed, and the fate of children not yet fully established in life. In some beliefs, he dwells in the third heaven, in a blessed realm above, and sends down souls for newborn children. In this role, he becomes not merely a survivor of the flood, but an arranger of destiny itself. The same elevation of the flood hero can be seen among neighbouring peoples, who borrowed the story along with its sacred prestige. In Western Siberia, the flood survivor is imagined as a heavenly scribe who records in the Book of Fate the lifespan and circumstances of human beings, according to divine command. In still other tellings, the flood hero becomes almost a second creator. Among the Soyots, the world is saved when an old man who foresaw catastrophe builds a raft strengthened with iron. The flood begins because the giant animal supporting the earth moves, unsettling the cosmic waters and sending them over the land. The old man survives with his family, and when the waters retreat and his raft comes to rest on a high mountain, he recreates the world that now exists. He is even credited with teaching humankind practical arts, including the making of strong drink. This detail is especially striking because the cultivation of intoxicating drink also belongs to later traditions about Noah. Here again, the flood survivor becomes the ancestor not just of humanity, but of human culture. So strong did these beliefs become around the Altai that people were convinced the vessel of the flood still remained on a mountain summit, Some insisted that one should never seek it out, because those who approached that place did not return alive. Others claimed that great nails found in the mountains were relics of the ancient Ark itself. Such ideas show how thoroughly the myth had been attached to the landscape. The flood was no longer only something that happened in sacred time. It had left traces in the very mountains of the present world. The rise of the flood hero to divine or semi-divine rank also reflects older religious influences from farther south. In Iranian tradition, the first great ruler of humanity is also linked with catastrophe, survival, and the afterlife. He becomes lord over souls and a guardian figure in death. Similar ideas seem to have passed into Altaic religious life, where the flood prince takes on authority over infants, over those who die in blessed circumstances, and over certain transitions between worlds. In some traditions, a figure whose name recalls ancient Iranian patterns appears as a death ruler or keeper of those who depart happily from life. These are not accidental parallels. They show how flood legend, kingship myth, and beliefs about the dead could merge into one powerful sacred personality. Farther north, among the more remote peoples of Siberia, flood tales take on a different tone. They sometimes explain not just survival, but the origin of different peoples and languages. Among the Ugrians, those saved from the waters are said to have drifted away on separate rafts and settled in different places once the flood had ended. In the Yenisei region, a version tells how the water rose for 7 days until part of humanity managed to cling to floating timbers. Then, a fierce north wind blew for 7 more days and scattered the survivors far apart. Because they landed in different places, they became different peoples and began speaking different languages. The story feels unusually local. The north wind, so important and so feared in that region, plays the decisive role. Yet even here, the repeated 7-day sequence suggests that older flood traditions from outside the region have helped shape the final form of the tale. Among the Samoyeds of the tundra, the flood becomes even harsher. 7 people are said to have survived in a boat, but after the flood, a terrible drought follows. Water is finally found by digging deep into the ground, but food is harder to obtain. One by one, the survivors die until only a young man and a young woman remain alive. They survive by eating creatures that come up from the earth, and from this pair, the present human race descends. The story is bleak and simple, stripped of much of the dramatic, moral structure of the more southern flood legends. It preserves instead the struggle for bare survival in a northern landscape where water, famine, and cold could all become equally deadly. In the far northeast, another version says that people escaped not in a built ship, but on rafts made from lashed tree trunks. They loaded these with supplies and anchored them with stones tied to long ropes, so the rafts would not drift out to sea. At last, the floating timber grounded on a high mountain. This sort of tale, told for example among the Kamchadals, feels more practical and closer to the realities of a forested, river-filled world. It lacks the sacred ark built at divine command, yet it still preserves the central pattern: overwhelming water, a small remnant, and a mountain of final safety. Flood was not the only cosmic disaster remembered in the north. Some peoples also spoke of an age when the world was consumed not by water but by fire. Among the Tungus, there is a tale that in the beginning the earth was burned by a vast conflagration lasting for years. The whole world became sea. All the people perished except for a boy and a girl, who were lifted into the sky by an eagle. After wandering in the air, they finally descended when the waters had receded and dry land reappeared. The eagle came down with them. The story is brief but full of suggestive power. Fire first destroys the earth, then water covers everything, and from this double catastrophe, a new human pair emerges. The Vogels preserve related stories of a world-devouring fire, though their versions bring in divine struggle more clearly. There, a sea of fire is sent upon the earth in order to destroy the devil. Gods save themselves in an iron vessel, while a few mortals escape on a raft protected by multiple layers of fireproof covering. In structure, the story resembles flood narratives, only the destructive element has changed. The means of rescue remained the same: raft, ship, sacred protection, and a small number of survivors. Other Vogel tales speak of a recurring sea of fire stretching from one edge of the sky to the other, through which a heroic rider dares to pass on a magic horse. It has been suggested that the Northern Lights may have inspired some of this fiery imagery, especially the streaks seen across the heavens like paths of burning light. Certainly the aurora must have stirred the imagination of northern peoples powerfully. Yet these tales cannot be explained by natural spectacle alone. A hero riding across a cosmic fire belongs to a broad, mythic pattern found in many regions. The conflagration tales of the Tungus and the Vogels seem linked in other ways as well. Both speak of long-lasting destruction, measured in repeated years or cycles. Both preserve a surviving remnant. Both combine fire, water, and a second beginning. Similar stories occur elsewhere in Asia, including Eastern India, where divine fire falls upon a sinful world, and only a brother and sister survive by hiding. Such stories were also known among the ancient civilizations of Western Asia, where cosmic destruction by flame could stand beside cosmic destruction by flood as one of the great endings of an age. In Central Asia, these themes were later joined to visions of the final end of the world. Among the Altai peoples, one eschatological story tells how a heavenly savior or teacher will descend to guide humanity, turning many people back toward a reverence and moral order. The powers of evil, enraged by this restoration, rise in open violence. The evil ruler attacks the heavenly messenger and slays him. His blood runs out across the world and becomes fire. That fire spreads over the whole earth and climbs upward into the sky itself. Then the high god appears, calls to the dead, and summons them back from every place where they had been hidden, under the earth, in the sea, in the fire, wherever death had taken them. The wicked and the lord of evil are destroyed in the conflagration, while a final separation is made between the forces of corruption and the restored order of the world. This is no longer simply a flood tale or a survival story. It is a full vision of the end time, shaped by strong dualistic religion and by the expectation of resurrection. A related belief appears among the Buryats. At the end of the age, a vast river of fire is expected to move across the world from east to west, throwing sparks in every direction until all creation burns. Yet even this destruction is not entirely final. Out of the old Earth's destruction, a new Earth is expected to appear, inhabited by new beings. The world is not simply erased. It is remade through catastrophe. In the traditions of the Trans-Baikal Tungus, the making of the first human beings begins with the world itself. The sky god does not create people from a single substance. Instead, he gathers the materials of the human body from the four great directions of the earth. From the east, he takes iron, from the south fire, from the west water, and from the north earth. Each of these becomes part of the human frame. Earth forms flesh and bone. Iron becomes the heart. Water becomes blood. Fire becomes warmth, the inner heat that keeps life alive. This idea is more than a simple creation image. It presents the first human being as a miniature version of the world, a living body assembled out of the same powers that structure the universe itself. That vision appears far beyond the Tungus. In many older traditions from Western Asia, the first man is also formed from the elements or from materials taken from the corners of the world. In some versions, the Maker gathers earth from every direction, and each portion carries a distinct colour or quality. This means that the first human is not merely an isolated creature placed into nature. He is nature gathered into one body. Flesh, heat, blood, breath, and thought all belong to the greater order outside him. Human life becomes a small world within the greater world, bound to it from the first moment of creation. Later, retellings in Slavic lands develop this same pattern in even more elaborate ways. There, the first body may be said to come partly from soil, partly from stone, partly from roots, water, wind, cloud, grass, and fire. Bones are linked with stone, blood with water, hair with plants, thought with moving air or cloud, warmth with fire. A human being is imagined almost as a gathering point of all visible substances. Even death does not entirely break that link. Some traditions describe resurrection as a reversal of creation, with each part of the body returning to the source from which it originally came. Bone returns to earth, blood to water, hair to plants, life to fire. The body dissolves back into the world because it had always belonged to it. There is also a powerful opposite idea, equally widespread and equally ancient. Instead of the first man being created from the world itself is created from the body of a primordial being. In one inner Asian tradition, the body of a sacred figure becomes the materials of the cosmos. Trees grow from his veins. Fire comes from the heat of his organs. The earth is formed from his body, iron from his bones, water from his blood, grass from his hair, the sun and moon from his eyes, the stars from the rest of his form. Similar stories appear in old Chinese tradition, where the first giant's voice becomes thunder, his blood becomes rivers, his breath becomes wind, and his body is transformed into the visible structure of the world. Ancient India also preserves this pattern in the image of the cosmic being, whose body is cut apart or unfolded into the world itself. Northern Europe carries a comparable memory in the tale of a primeval giant whose flesh becomes earth, whose blood becomes sea, whose bones become rocks, and whose skull becomes the sky. These are not separate inventions born in total isolation. They belong to one enormous family of mythic thought, in which human form and cosmic order mirror one another. Among the peoples of Siberia, however, the details of human creation vary from group to group. Some Buryat traditions say flesh came from red clay, bones from stone, blood from water. Some Altaic stories imagine bones made from reeds, while the rest of the body is shaped from clay. In the far northwest, one tale says the Maker bound together willow branches into a skeleton, covered it with clay, and then breathed life into it. Elsewhere, human beings and animals are formed from earth and snow. The Yenisei Ostiaks tell of the Creator kneading earth in his hands and casting two lumps aside, one becoming a man and the other a woman. These are imaginative local forms, but they do not prove that the broader idea of creation was native to each region in its full shape. The larger story patterns, especially the dramatic ones, clearly reveal older outside influences that had already spread across vast territories. That becomes especially obvious in the many creation stories, where two opposing beings appear. The Creator on one side, and a hostile power on the other. In these tales, the evil being does not usually create humanity outright. Instead, he interferes with the Creator's work, spoiling, corrupting, or altering the body before life is fully given. A dog almost always plays a key role in this moment. The dog is placed as guardian beside the unfinished human body, and the enemy succeeds only by bribing or deceiving this guardian. One Black Tatar story tells that the Great Maker formed the first human beings from Earth, but could not yet give them life. He had to go to heaven to obtain the breath or spirit needed to animate them. So he left a dog to stand watch. At that time, the dog was naked, without fur. While the creator was away, the evil Erlich approached and offered the dog a splendid reward. If the dog would let him near the bodies, he would give it a golden, hairy covering. The promise was enough. The dog accepted, and Erlich came close to the still lifeless human forms and spat on them, defiling them before fleeing at the creator's return. When the Maker saw that the bodies had been fouled and could no longer be cleaned completely, he solved the problem in a harsh and remarkable way. He turned the human bodies inside out and then gave them life. That, the tale says, is why the inside of the human body is full of filth and impurity. A Yakut version explains the same condition in a different setting. There, after creating the world, the Maker forms 7 stone images and leaves a being called man to guard them inside a stone house. Day after day, the enemy seeks entry and is refused. In the end, he wins access by offering the guardian an indestructible garment. Once admitted, he befouls the images with excrement. The creator returns, sees what has happened, punishes the failed guardian by turning him into a dog, and then turns the polluted stone forms inside out before breathing spirit into them. Once again, human inward filth is explained as the result of demonic defilement before life began. Related tales among vulgar peoples and northern groups add that sickness itself, especially illnesses arising from within, comes from this same contamination. The devil's saliva or spittle becomes the source of disease, decay, and bodily weakness. In some northern stories, the dog receives its fur in a similar way. It begins naked like the first people, and gains its hairy coat only because of its contact with the evil one. A Samoyed version says that boils, eruptions, and sickness are caused by the devil's saliva, while the dog's hair covering appears after demonic contact. These details shift from place to place, but the pattern remains stable. The dog fails in its duty. The enemy touches what should have remained pure. As a result, the human body becomes vulnerable from the beginning. Another branch of the same story explains not the filth inside the body, but the loss of an original outer covering. Some Buryat tales say that the first humans were once covered in hair. In one version, 3 divine beings create the first pair using clay, stone, and water. Because they do not know which of them should supply the spirit of life, they decide by a sign. Each places a torch and a vessel of water before himself and sleeps. The one whose torch burns and whose water produces a plant during the night will become the life-giver and guardian of humankind. But one of them cheats. He secretly moves the signs of favour from another to himself. When the deception is discovered, the offended divine figure pronounces a curse. The people brought to life by theft will steal from one another and live in quarrel. Even before the human story continues, a moral flaw has entered the world through trickery at the level of creation itself. Then comes the now familiar guardian dog. The first human pair is still asleep and still covered in a natural coat, and the responsible god must leave briefly to fetch a spirit for them. A dog is set as their protector. The devil arrives, bribes the dog by promising it a permanent fur like that of human beings, and is allowed to come near. He spits upon the sleeping bodies. When the god returns, he is furious. He curses the dog so that it will live on scraps, be beaten by humans, and know hardship. Then, he removes from the human pair the hairy coat that has been defiled, leaving only small patches in those places the devil had not touched. That is why human beings now stand mostly naked. In another version, the original covering is not hair but a kind of horn-like or nail-like outer layer. After the devil spoils the body, that hard covering survives only on the fingers and toes. Human beings become soft-skinned, vulnerable to disease and death, because their original protective layer has been lost. This same thought survives among the Vogels and Maudvins. There too, the first human once had a stronger surface, something like nail or horn. Through the devil's interference, only traces of it remain at the tips of the body. The myth is trying to explain why human beings are weak, sickly, and easy to wound, even though they were made by a divine creator. It does so by placing the cause not in the creator's failure, but in the interruption of the original design by a hostile power. In some Central Asian stories, the devil goes even further. He does not merely soil the body, he gives it life before God can do so. One Altaic tale says the creator shaped the first man from earth and stone and made the first woman from one of his ribs. But he had not yet found the spirit needed to animate them, so he left a naked dog on guard and went in search of life. While he was away, the dog gained its hairy coat by eating the devil's excrement, and the devil himself brought the human pair to life by blowing spirit into them through a reed. When the creator returned and saw the people already moving, he hesitated. Should he destroy them and begin again, or let them remain as they were? In the story, a frog intervenes and advises that life should continue. Whoever is to die will die. Whoever is to live will live. The creator accepts this, and humanity remains in existence despite its corrupted beginning. Another tale tells of two creators making a human body together, and then leaving to seek a spirit for it. Again, a naked dog is appointed as guardian. Again, the devil bribes the dog with the promise of fur. But this time he gives life by blowing smoke into the nostrils of the body. When the creators return, they are startled to find their human already walking. These versions are especially revealing because they shift the point of corruption from the physical body to the inner life. Humanity is not just dirty inside or weak in flesh. Its very breath and awareness have been touched by the wrong power. That helps explain why another group of stories turns from the human body in general to woman in particular. One Altaic narrative begins after the world has already been made. The creator forms 7 male beings and 7 sacred trees. 1 tree for each man. He then creates an 8th man on a golden mountain and leaves the others to themselves. After 7 years, he returns and sees that the trees have grown new branches each year, but the number of men has not increased. The explanation is simple. There are no women, so there can be no descendants. The creator gives authority to Maidere, a powerful heavenly figure, to solve this. Maidere fashions a woman, but before he can give her life, he has to leave. Once more, the dog is set to guard the still, lifeless form. The devil arrives and bribes the dog in the usual way. He comes close to the woman and animates her himself, not only by blowing into her nostrils, but by filling her ears with sound from musical instruments. Through this act, she gains both life and mind. Yet because her living soul comes through demonic influence, the story says she receives 7 tempers and 9 moods. When Maidere returns, he questions the dog and hears the same excuse as in other stories, the promise of a fur covering that would protect against heat and cold. He grants the dog such a covering, but as a curse rather than a gift, condemning it to a low and difficult existence under human control. The woman remains alive, but her instability is traced back to the devil's early touch. In all these tales, the naked dog is one of the clearest common elements. That detail alone suggests that the stories belong to a single broad tradition, however much they differ in meaning. Sometimes the devil spits on the body. Sometimes he strips away its protective covering. Sometimes he breathes life into it first. Sometimes the story is used to explain bodily filth. Sometimes disease. Sometimes mortality. sometimes women's changeable nature, and sometimes the moral weakness of human life in general. But in nearly every version, the same structure appears. God or a divine creator makes the body. The creator must leave before finishing the work. A dog is placed as guardian. The enemy bribes the dog. Through that betrayal, the human being is altered forever. The deep roots of this pattern almost certainly lie farther south, in an atmosphere shaped by strong dualistic religion. The conflict between the good creator and the spoiler belongs to an old way of imagining the world. One in which evil does not create from nothing but ruins, contaminates, and deforms what was originally made good. The dog too once had sacred force in that same religious world, acting as a guardian against evil powers. Over time, these ideas seem to have passed through the traditions of Western Asia, perhaps through Eastern Christian storytelling and older Iranian religious thought, and then spread both into Eastern Europe and into Central and Northern Asia. In the East, they took on new local colours, but the core pattern remained. One Altai tale carries the story further. After the woman has been given life through the devil's interference, the heavenly figure asks the 7 men which of them will take her as a partner. 3 of them refuse and flee to the Golden Mountain, where they become divine assistants. 4 remain on earth. Then a wife is made for one of them from his own ribs. A related Yakut story also speaks of 7 first men, and tells how only 4 receive wives. The remaining 3 are dissatisfied. They complain, are ignored, and from this lack comes adultery. Later, when daughters are born, wives are eventually found for the others as well, though one woman remains without a partner and becomes the first prostitute. Here, the creation myth turns into an explanation of disorder in sexual and social life. Quarrel, jealousy, adultery, and marginal existence all trace back to imbalance at the very beginning. In many northern traditions, humanity does not fall from grace only through disobedience or through the devil's corruption at the beginning. There is also another kind of suffering woven into the old stories, one that feels far more immediate and physical: the endless torment of biting insects. In the lands of the far north, where summer brings clouds of mosquitoes so dense that both people and animals can hardly endure them, such creatures demanded an explanation. Their presence was too overwhelming to be dismissed as ordinary. They had to come from somewhere dark, violent, and unnatural. That is why so many Siberian peoples imagined that mosquitoes were not harmless creations of nature at all, but the final remains of monsters once destroyed. Among the Yenisei Ostiaks, the origin of mosquitoes is connected with a terrible female being from the farthest north, a devouring demon whose very existence belonged to the edge of the human world. Other northern peoples tell similar stories, though the details change from place to place. What remains constant is the central idea. Blood-sucking insects were born from the destruction of some man-eating creature. They are the lingering revenge of a dead enemy, still feeding on humankind, long after its body has been burned, scattered, or cut apart. One Samoyed story tells of a hero who lost his parents to a giant cannibal. The monster had devoured them, and the boy escaped only by fleeing into a desolate region where he was raised by relatives. As he grew, he became strong and determined, and at last, he decided to free his people from the terror that had consumed his family. He found the creature, fought it, and killed it, but this victory did not end the danger. The demon's nature was too powerful to disappear so easily. Even after death, it seemed able to return. So the hero chose the most final destruction he could imagine. He burned the body. Yet even in the flames, the monster was not silent. When the fire had nearly done its work, the jaws of the dead being still seemed to grind together, and a voice declared that even reduced to ash, it would continue to torment humankind. The wind, it said, would scatter those remains into the air, and from them would arise tiny tormentors that would forever drink human blood. From those ashes came the mosquitoes of the northern summer. Another Samoyed form of the same story adds an eerie detail. From the flesh of the dead giant, a small black bird is born, as though even the burned remains still retained some fragment of living malice. That image strengthens the feeling that these beings never disappear cleanly. Evil does not simply die. It fragments, scatters, and returns in lesser but still painful forms. Among the Ostiaks of the Vark River, the same basic idea appears in a more compact and dramatic tale. A great bird catches a giant fish and brings it home, but instead of preparing it properly, its sister cooks something worthless. Enraged, the bird flies away until it reaches the dwelling of a man-eating giant. Finding the house empty, it helps itself to the rich fat stored there, but the giant returns and catches it. To save its own life, the bird promises to give its sister, in marriage, to the monster. Once freed, it rushes home and tries to save her by fastening the doorway so tightly that only a narrow opening remains. When the giant comes to claim his bride, he tries to force his way through that space and becomes stuck. Then, the bird attacks and kills him with a great knife. The whole house is burned, and the body is reduced to ash. But even now, the spirit of the monster speaks, declaring that each summer those ashes will be born again as mosquitoes, continuing to feed on human flesh in a different shape. The giant dies, but its hunger survives. Farther south, among the Altai Tatars, the same mythic pattern appears in a form shaped by a more elaborate heroic world. There, the enemy is a monstrous being, created by the Lord of Evil, a devourer who lives in the waters and uses an impossibly long tongue to seize and swallow human beings. 3 heavenly champions decide that this creature must be destroyed. One of them descends from above, is born from a virgin, and enters the human world as a hero. While still young, he encounters the giant and is nearly dragged into the sea by its extended tongue. Instead of falling victim, he seizes the tongue and pulls with such force that the whole earth seems in danger of being dragged under the waters. To prevent disaster, the young hero drinks so much of the sea that the level falls and the demon's feet become visible. Then, he tears the creature from the deep and smashes it against the rocks. Blood and entrails burst out across the stone, and the varied colours of rock are explained as the marks of that ancient struggle. Finally, the hero cuts the body into tiny pieces, and from those scattered fragments come all sorts of insects, including mosquitoes. What had once devoured people on a large scale now survives as countless smaller tormentors. Yakut tradition preserves the same thought in another form. There too, a man-eating giant is destroyed by fire, and from the shattered remains of its bones come harmful creeping things, and troublesome creatures of different kinds. Mongol stories also speak of a hero who slays a demon, crushes its body into fragments, and scatters the pieces into the air. From them are born mosquitoes and other biting insects. In all these stories, the same logic governs the transformation. Destruction never entirely purifies evil. The dead body of the monster becomes a seedbed for lesser evils. The great enemy is gone, but its violence disperses into the ordinary world. Among the Goldie of the Amur region, this idea appears in vivid and unsettling detail. In one tale, 2 sisters live together. While one is away, a man-eater comes to the other, lures her from hiding, and deceives her into exposing her tongue. The giant tears it out, killing her. When the sister returns and discovers what has happened, she determines to avenge her. She wanders in search of the monster's dwelling and eventually finds not a simple house, but a dreadful place filled with human remains. One storehouse holds hands, another feet, another heads, and in yet another hang countless tongues from the roof. Among them she recognizes the still warm tongue of her sister and wraps it carefully in cloth. She then continues into the forest until she reaches the home of the devourer itself. The man-eater is absent, but its sister is there, and unlike the monster, she is willing to help. When the cannibal returns after feeding on a human body, the two women wait until it sleeps, and then smash it to pieces with hammers. As they scatter the fragments, they pronounce a kind of curse. Since it fed on human flesh, its remains shall now become insects that feed on human blood. The smallest pieces become gnats, the larger ones mosquitoes, and the greatest fragments become flies, beetles, and other pests. At once the air fills with swarming life. Another Goldie tale shifts the setting but keeps the same final transformation. A brother notices that something is wrong with his sister. She has been secretly visited, and by sprinkling ashes outside the house, he discovers the tracks of a tiger. Later, it becomes clear that she carries within her the power of that beast. As she lies chanting to herself, she reveals that the tiger is her husband and that his spirit lives in her. She cannot be killed in any ordinary way, but if her little finger is cut off, she will die. Her brother does this, then builds a great fire and burns the body. As it burns, evil spirits fly out of the flames in the form of birds and insects. Here again, the destruction of a dangerous being gives rise not to peace, but to a multiplication of lesser threats. These stories are not isolated curiosities. Very similar cannibal myths appear among Tungusic groups and across the far northern world, and remarkably close versions are also found across the Pacific among indigenous peoples of North America. There, two blood-drinking insects are said to have been born from the ashes or remains of a defeated man-eater. That wide distribution suggests that this is not the product of a single local invention. It belongs to an old and deeply rooted mythic pattern, shared across the northern regions of the world. What makes these tales especially striking is the way they turn a seasonal, natural torment into a moral and cosmic memory. Mosquitoes are not explained as simple parts of summer. They are treated as survivors of ancient evil. Their hunger is inherited. Their swarming is the afterlife of violence. Even when the great cannibal is burned, cut apart, crushed, or scattered, something of its appetite remains alive. Every bite becomes a reminder that some forms of destruction do not disappear. They break into pieces and enter the world in smaller forms, harder to defeat because they are now everywhere. When medieval travellers first described the religious life of the Mongols, they were struck by something that seemed at once simple and surprising. They reported that the people of the steppe believed in a single high god, the maker of all things seen and unseen. At the same time, those same travellers also noticed rituals, sacred images, and a wide range of divine beings beneath that highest power. At first glance, this may seem contradictory, but in reality it reveals something central to the old religion of Inner Asia. Above all lesser powers stood the god of heaven, and his place was exceptional. He was not merely one spirit among many. He belonged to a higher order, older and more universal than the rest. By the time these travellers wrote their accounts, Central Asia had already absorbed many outside influences. Persian religious ideas had spread widely. Manichaean and Christian teachings had travelled deep into the steppe. The Mongol world had long been in contact with Iran, China, and the religions of Western Asia. Because of that, the old descriptions of the one heavenly god cannot simply be treated as untouched evidence from the remotest past. Yet they still appear fundamentally trustworthy for the time they describe. The more difficult question is whether this high god of heaven was already central before those later influences arrived, or whether his position became more defined through long contact with older, civilized traditions. The most important clue lies in language. Among the Mongols and many other Altaic-speaking peoples, the word used for the highest god was originally the ordinary word for the sky itself. Variants of that same word are found across a broad linguistic area among Mongols, Buryats, Tatars, Yakuts, Dolgans, and Chuvash. In its earliest form, it did not mean a separate person living in heaven. It meant heaven as visible reality, the blue expanse above the earth. Only later did it come to mean a divine being who ruled from the sky. That shift is extremely important. It suggests that in the beginning the object of reverence was not a human-shaped ruler sitting above the heavens, but the heavens themselves, alive with power, order, fertility, and mystery. This kind of divine sky is not unique to Inner Asia. Similar developments appear elsewhere. Ancient Persians revered the whole vault of heaven as a divine power. In Old Chinese thought, the same word could mean both sky and supreme heavenly authority. Among northern peoples too, the sky itself could be addressed as though it were alive, without any strict separation between the physical heavens and the god who governed them. This points to a very early stage of belief in which the world above was not merely a location for gods. It was sacred in itself. Among the Mongols, one title for this power was especially revealing: Blue Heaven. That expression preserves the old concrete vision with remarkable clarity. Blue Heaven is not yet a fully abstract god detached from nature. It is the living sky, visible, immense, and active. Another title, Eternal Heaven, points in a slightly different direction. It suggests permanence, authority, and enduring rule over the world and its fate. Some scholars once tried to separate these two ideas sharply, treating the blue heaven as a more primitive natural force and the eternal heaven as a more developed spiritual power. But in actual tradition, the two often overlap. The same heavenly power can be both the visible sky and the eternal ruler whose decrees shape human destiny. That leads directly to one of the most striking features of Inner Asian religion: the belief that heaven governs fate. In Mongol tradition, what happens on earth is often understood as the will or decree of heaven. Great rulers rise by its favour. Victories come by its command. The birth of a prince or even of an ordinary person may be explained as part of its design. Laws and commands issued by rulers could be justified as having been given under the authority of the eternal sky. In this view, heaven is not merely a passive presence overhead. It watches, ordains, and allows events to unfold according to a higher order. This belief in heavenly decree did not develop in isolation. It closely resembles old ideas found among Indo-Iranian peoples, where a cosmic order governed both divine and human existence. Similar concepts also appear in China, where fate could be described as the order of heaven. Across these traditions, heaven is not only powerful, it is lawful. It binds even rulers to a standard beyond themselves. Yet the Inner Asian version remains strongly connected with the visible sky. Fate is not imagined as an abstract metaphysical force detached from the world above. It is written into the heavens themselves. That idea becomes even more meaningful when placed beside the cosmology of the ancient Near East, especially Babylonia. There, the sky was seen as a vast system of ordered signs. The movements of the stars revealed future events. Heaven could be read like a text. In such a worldview, fate was not random. It was inscribed above. This may explain why Central Asian traditions later came to speak of heaven as decreeing, ordering, and judging. The old sky had become not only divine, but legible. It was a realm of signs, measures, and unavoidable outcomes. Among Turkic peoples, this heavenly decree also came to be personified in new ways. Names developed for a divine power that orders, commands, or allots destiny. Variants of this title appear among Mongols, Buryats, Altaic Tatars, Chuvash, and among neighbouring peoples who borrowed religious concepts from them. Sometimes this ordering figure is still the heaven god himself. At other times, he becomes a distinct being within the heavens, one who manages the details of fate on behalf of the supreme power above. This is especially clear in traditions that speak of layered heavens, where different divine beings occupy different levels and perform specialized roles. The sphere of birth was particularly tied to this ordering force. Many peoples believed that each person entered life through the decree of heaven. Some traditions say that every individual has a special heavenly guardian assigned at birth, a spirit of good fortune and life who accompanies that person from infancy onward. Among the Altai peoples, this protective being is said to bring the soul or life force down from a heavenly source before the child is born. It remains close throughout life, guarding health, property, and happiness, while a darker companion follows as well, always seeking harm. The good spirit watches from one shoulder, the evil one from the other, both recording a person's actions. Here, the old idea of fate is no longer only cosmic. It has become intimate, personal, and moral. This belief that each person has a heavenly counterpart is closely linked to another old thought, that every human being has a star. When a new star appears, a life has begun. When a star falls, a life has ended. This idea is found not only among steppe peoples, but also among northern Siberian groups. It reflects the same deep union between human life and the sky above. Birth and death are not merely earthly events. They are mirrored in the heavens. The heaven god was also imagined as judge and avenger. Medieval observers noted that the Mongols believed heaven punishes wrongdoing. This punishment is not usually imagined as taking place in a distant afterlife. It falls in this world. Heaven sees what people do, and no ruler or commoner can hide from it. Oaths are sworn in its presence. Wrongdoing brings consequences because the order of heaven itself reacts against disorder. In that sense, heaven is morally neutral but absolutely powerful. It does not spare princes more than peasants. Once its order is violated, retribution follows as naturally as shadow follows light. Even so, heaven was not always imagined as coldly mechanical. At times, it also gave warnings. Storms, comets, meteors, famine, and other disturbances could be read as signs that heaven was displeased. Rulers were expected to take such signs seriously. A king who ignored heaven's displeasure risked losing power, favour, or even his life. Chronicles from Inner Asia preserve stories in which rulers changed their behaviour after extraordinary signs in the sky or strange lights appeared around sacred objects. These events were treated not as accidents, but as messages from above. The best fortune any ruler could hope for was to stand in the favour of heaven. The farther north one moves, however, the less sharply this providential and judging side of heaven appears. Among Tungus, Samoyeds, Yenisei Ostiaks, and in some Yakut traditions, the sky god can seem much more distant. He exists, he is powerful, and he may be the source of life, but he does not necessarily involve himself constantly in human affairs. Some tales even show the heaven god as almost detached, letting human beings increase or die without close supervision. This distance is important. It suggests that the more elaborate moral and providential image of heaven may have been strengthened in the south under the influence of older civilizations, while more northern peoples preserved a simpler and more remote sky god. Yet one function of heaven remained widespread across the whole region. It was understood as the source of life. Heaven gives life to the earth. It sends vitality downward. In many traditions, the sky is treated as male and the earth as female. Heaven provides the animating force. Earth gives material form. This is one of the most ancient religious patterns in Eurasia. It probably arose from close observation of nature. Rain, warmth, light, and wind descend from above and awaken growth below. Out of that experience came the idea that the sky fathers life, while the earth bears and nourishes it. Certain sacred objects reflect this fertility belief in especially vivid ways. In some Buryat areas, unusual stones believed to have fallen from heaven were treated as powerful sources of fertility and rain. During drought, they were honoured and wet in ritual acts, meant to bring moisture and abundance. Some of these stones may have been linked with very old generative symbolism. Whatever their precise meaning, they show that what came down from heaven was not only dangerous or mysterious, it could also be life-giving. This same idea appears in countless stories about the descent of souls. Among the Yakuts, the soul of a child may come from heaven in the shape of a bird. In Mongol legend, a founding ancestor receives life from a heavenly force descending in hail. Elsewhere, a ray of light entering a virgin becomes the means by which a future ruler is conceived. Such stories are not random marvels. They all rest on one basic conviction. The animating principle of life comes from above. The names of certain deities preserve this meaning even more clearly. Some Yakut divine titles mean not simply God, but creator, begetter, or giver of birth. Alongside the high masculine creator stands a female being associated specifically with childbirth and the descent of the soul. She brings the child's spirit from heaven, helps the mother in labour, and is praised as both procreator and nourisher. Similar figures appear among neighbouring peoples, and related names can be found among vulgar Finnic groups that borrowed religious language from Turkic-speaking neighbours. This suggests that the idea of heaven as a source of creation and birth was both ancient and highly influential. Among northern peoples too, heaven is remembered as the giver of what the earth needs. It sends game, blessing, life, and sometimes even directly lets things fall from above. The sky god of the Tungus, for instance, may be called simply the Lord, the giver, the one from whom life and good fortune proceed. Even when his role in moral judgment remains limited, his role in providing existence is unmistakable. The connection between heaven, light, and purity also shaped ritual life. Sacrifices to the heaven god were usually directed toward the dawn or the bright eastern sky. The proper offering, when an animal was used, had to be white. This was not accidental. White belonged to light, purity, and the upper world. In some places, instead of slaughtering the offering, a living white animal was dedicated to heaven and never again put to ordinary labour. Such animals became sacred property of the sky. Some rites make the cosmology of heaven visible in extraordinary ways. Among the Yakuts, a series of trees may be erected before the sacrifice, some with leaves and others with bird figures attached. These represent the different levels of heaven through which the offering must symbolically travel to reach the highest god. A similar pattern appears among the Dolgans, who place a row of stumps with bird figures on top, each corresponding to one level of the sky. The shaman, aided by these symbolic birds, rises in imagination through the heavens toward the supreme divine realm. These rituals show that the world above was not thought of as empty space. It was a structured, living order through which beings, offerings, and souls could move. Purity was another natural quality of heaven. The sky, more than the earth, was imagined as loving cleanliness. Tales spread widely that the clouds once hung lower over the world, but rose higher after being defiled by human impurity. Some peoples believed that women in certain states of ritual uncleanness should not look directly at the sky. Lightning, too, was often thought to strike where filth or evil had been hidden. From such ideas, it is easy to see how the moral holiness of heaven later developed from an older sense of physical purity and distance from corruption. As heavenly religion became more developed, the sky itself could gradually become merely the dwelling of a higher god rather than the god in its original form. Tales then began to describe a divine palace in the upper world, with servants, family, cattle, and riches. Some stories tell of heroes visiting this brilliant heavenly court and being received as guests. These are later elaborations, but they reveal how the old living sky could slowly transform into a royal, divine household. The layered sky also played an important role here. The idea that heaven was divided into multiple levels spread widely across Asia. Once this idea took hold, the supreme god naturally came to be placed in the highest level, above all the rest. The Yakut creator may dwell in the 7th or 9th heaven depending on how many layers are imagined. The Yenisei Ostiaks place their god above the 7th heaven in a transparent palace. The northern peoples too, therefore, preserved the notion that the highest divine power belongs at the summit of a many-storied sky. The location of this heavenly throne was often imagined near the North Star at the navel of the sky. This made sense in a cosmos where the heavens revolved around a fixed point. The still centre of the sky, unchanging while all else turned, was the most fitting seat for the ruler of the universe. The world pillar, the world mountain, and the throne of the highest god all converged in this northern region of the heavens. From there, the overgod could direct the changing life of the world below. Many honorific names were given to this being. Among the Altai Tatars he might be called Great, Rich and Great, or Merciful Khan. Among Mongols and Buryats, Buddhist vocabulary introduced new titles, blending older sky religion with later imported sacred language. Yet beneath these later names, the core image remained visible. The high god of heaven, ancient, elevated, luminous, and central. Closely associated with him were lesser gods or heavenly assistants whose number was often fixed. A group of 7 appears especially often. Among Kyrgyz, Siberian Tatars, Yakuts, and others, 7 divine beings are described as sons, helpers, or attendants of the overgod. Their names vary and are often poorly remembered, but their number itself is highly significant. It suggests a connection not merely with family structure, but with cosmology. Among the Ostiaks and Vogels, these 7 heavenly beings are sometimes identified with major local gods, or patrons of particular lands and waters. Yet the structure surrounding them is revealing. In some traditions, the sky is imagined as 7-storied, with the supreme god in the topmost level, and one son or helper in each lower level. That arrangement points strongly to a very old astronomical background. The 7 heavenly powers correspond naturally to the 7 classical lights of the sky: sun, moon, and 5 visible planets. In that case, the sons of God are not originally tribal deities at all. They are the powers of the ordered heavens, adapted over time into local myth. A clear example survives in the traditions of the Vasyugan Ostiaks. Their shamans describe the heavens as layered, with divine beings in each story below the highest god. These lower beings are sometimes called interpreters, or watchers of heaven. Their names are often forgotten, but their ritual offerings remain known. One receives arrows, another cloth, another sable skin, another a special cup, another the hide of a deer. One of them is explicitly associated with sending game and fish down to humans. Even a Christian saint eventually enters this sequence as a divine protector of travellers. This is not a system invented whole by the Ostiaks. It is a transformed inheritance, probably borrowed from southern neighbours and reshaped through local practice. Among the Lebed Tatars, the arrangement is even clearer. The supreme god and his consort dwell in the highest heaven, while his sons or subordinate powers occupy lower levels one by one. One dark, divine figure has fallen away from the heavenly household and chosen the underworld instead. This separation of a black heavenly being from the bright upper order may preserve the memory of an old planetary god linked with darkness or misfortune. Other named powers are connected with war, good fortune, tribal protection, or heavenly mediation. The whole system looks like an older astral religion, translated into the language of divine family and heavenly court. Sometimes the sacred number shifts from 7 to 9. Mongol and Buryat traditions often speak of 9 heavens, 9 divine beings, or 9 protectors. This may reflect a later expansion of the heavenly system as cosmologies grew more elaborate. Yet the older group of 7 remains especially important because of its clear connection to the visible sky. In China, too, an old set of 7 heavenly rulers existed, corresponding to Sun, Moon, and 5 planets. Across Asia, then, the sacred 7 appears not only in myth, but in ritual. 9 priests, 9 offerings, 9 bowls, or 9 loaves may stand in ceremonies where an older astral pattern still lingers, even after its original meaning has faded. The title given to these heavenly beings as interpreters is especially revealing. In old Chaldean thought, the planets were called interpreters because, unlike the fixed stars, they wandered and thereby revealed the intentions of the gods. They made the future legible. In that light, the 7 heavenly helpers of inner Asian tradition become easier to understand. They are not only sons or servants of the highest god, they are readers and writers of fate. This belief survives very clearly in Western Siberian tradition. There, the heavenly helpers are said to write down the course of each human life in a great book, according to the command of the high god. When a child is born, the length of life and the shape of destiny are entered in this celestial record. Older Tatar tales preserve a similar scene. 7 gods sit in a heavenly tent behind a curtain, with the great book of life before them. There, they record births and deaths and determine the lot of humankind. Long before Islam reached the steppe, the peoples of Inner Asia already seem to have lived with a strong sense that human life unfolds under powers fixed above. Later, religions may have strengthened that outlook, given it new language and tied it to broader systems of belief, but the older foundations were already there. The heavenly assistants of the sky god, the divine sons, the writers of fate, and the powers connected with birth and destiny all appear in traditions that belong to an earlier, non-Islamic religious world. Even the name used by some Turkic peoples for certain heavenly beings came from Persia, showing that the religious imagination of Central Asia had been shaped for a very long time by powerful southern influences. Among all these heavenly figures, one of the most remarkable is a being known in some Western Siberian traditions as the writer of human life. The Altaics imagined him as the chief assistant of the sky god, living just below the highest divine ruler. His task was precise and immense. He wrote into the book of fate, according to the command of the over-god, how long each person would live and under what conditions that life would unfold. When someone died, people could say that the days written for that person had come to an end. In some places, this being was understood as simply another aspect of the sky god himself, one more divine title among many. But that does not explain everything. He was not only the one who wrote, he was also a messenger, a traveller, a scout sent down to inspect the world and carry heavenly decisions into human life. In some Altaic traditions, he bore a name taken from Turkic neighbours, and was described as the one who came down to earth whenever a child was born. He not only wrote the span of life, but moved between heaven and the world of men as a divine envoy. For that reason, he was also called the Man of Many Lands or the Travelling Man. Some stories say that he journeyed in animal form, often as a goose. In that shape, he resembles another heavenly being, a younger divine son who also travels in bird form, gliding wherever he wishes. Other stories give this messenger a horse with wings, a supernatural steed that flies through the sky, breathing fire from one nostril and smoke from the other. Whatever stories gathered around his name later, the figure itself could not have originated among people who never knew writing. The image of a heavenly scribe belongs to a much older and more literate religious world. Something very close to the same idea appears farther west among other peoples of the Volga region. There too, a being tied to fate is said to come down at the birth of each child, determine the child's destiny, record the name, and then return to heaven to report to the god above. Among the Cheremists, a similar divine intermediary receives a special offering so that he may present the troubles of the people before the heavenly ruler. Even among the Votiacs, ritual actions connected with sacrifice preserve hints of a forgotten messenger of this kind. A goose, for instance, may be sacrificed without anyone clearly remembering to whom it belongs, except for the belief that it escorts the sacrifice to heaven. These fragments suggest that the old image of a heavenly courier and recorder had spread widely, even when its original meaning had partly faded. The deeper roots of this figure almost certainly lie in the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. There, long before such ideas appeared in the forests and steppes of the north, people already believed in tablets of destiny and a book in which life was written. In that older world there was a god whose task was to record fate and whose wisdom was inseparable from writing itself. A comparable figure also appears in Egypt, where a divine scribe is shown with writing tools in hand, keeping the record of what belongs to gods and men. The northern writer of fate, then, is not an isolated curiosity. He is the distant heir of one of the oldest religious ideas in Eurasia, that human life is entered into a heavenly record before it is fully lived on earth. Beyond these individual heavenly servants, the mythology of Inner Asia also preserves much larger groups of gods, whose origin the people themselves could no longer explain. One especially important number is 33. In Altaic tradition, a set of 33 heavenly beings was believed to dwell on the world mountain. That number is unlikely to have been created locally. It points clearly toward India, where a group of 33 gods had long been known in sacred tradition. The same Altaic cosmology also speaks of heavens arranged in layers one above another, and this too reflects an imported and already formed image of the universe rather than a local invention. Even more elaborate is the Buryat and Mongol idea of 99 heavenly beings. These were divided into two opposed groups. One side was associated with brightness, favour, and benevolence toward humanity. The other was linked with darkness, disaster, illness, fog, and all kinds of harm. The good powers were often called white, the hostile powers black. In one version, the two groups lived together in peace at first, and only later came into conflict. Their quarrel, in some tellings, began over a beautiful daughter belonging to a heavenly being who stood between the two sides. These stories preserve memory of a division that was already old when the tales were told. The people could repeat the numbers and the names, but no longer understood why the heavenly world had this exact structure. That is one of the clearest signs that the system itself came from elsewhere and was absorbed whole. The same mixture of fixed numbers and fading explanations appears among the Altai peoples, who imagined many worlds above and beyond the present one. In one tale, when the Lord of Evil was driven out of heaven, his followers fell to earth in a fixed number of places. Each then became a different kind of destructive spirit, working harm in the region where it landed. The number of these evil beings comes very close to the number of hostile heavenly powers in Buryat religion. That cannot be accidental. Beneath these beliefs there seems to lie an old star-based mythology in which fixed groups of celestial beings were connected with good and evil powers, ordered realms, and the fate of the world below. That old star religion becomes especially visible in traditions about the sons of the sky god. Many Turkic and neighbouring peoples speak of 7 divine sons or heavenly attendants. Their names often vary, their functions are partly forgotten, and local gods were sometimes inserted into the list. But the number itself remains significant. 7 is too meaningful in ancient cosmology to ignore. It points directly to the 7 visible planetary powers of older Near Eastern astronomy: the sun, the moon, and the 5 wandering stars. In some northern traditions, the heavens are imagined as 7-storied, with the highest god in the topmost level, and 1 assistant or son in each of the layers below. That arrangement preserves the old planetary structure almost intact, even if the people who repeated it no longer understood where it had come from. Among the Altaics, this heavenly order survived in a particularly revealing form. Shamans described the sky as layered and filled with divine watchers or interpreters. Each had his own place and his own sacrificial signs. One was linked with arrows shot into the sky, another with white cloth, another with a sable skin, another with a cup, another with the gift of game and fish. A Christian saint was later added to the system, but the older framework remained visible beneath that later layer. These beings were not invented in the northern forests. Their very titles suggest an imported cosmology in which heavenly powers observe, interpret, and govern the world. The word interpreter is especially important here. In ancient Babylonia, the planets were thought of as the interpreters of divine intention because, unlike the fixed stars, they moved in complex ways and seemed to reveal what the gods meant for the world. This old idea fits the inner Asian heavenly assistants with remarkable precision. Their task was not merely to exist in the heavens, but to watch, report, write, and direct. They belonged to a cosmic bureaucracy in which fate flowed down from above. The same celestial order also shaped ideas of birth. Many Central Asian peoples believe that each newborn child receives not only life from heaven, but also a personal destiny guarded by a special spirit. This spirit follows the child through life, protects health, watches prosperity, and remains close as a kind of invisible companion. Against it stands an evil counterpart, another unseen presence trying to bring harm. The good being records the person's good deeds, the evil being the bad. Here, fate is no longer only a remote decree fixed in the sky. It becomes a living relationship between heaven and the individual soul. Closely tied to all of this is the great maternal side of the cosmos. Among Finno-Ugric and Altaic peoples alike, there appears the image of a mighty mother of birth, a divine female power who dwells in heaven and governs the beginning of life. Among some Turkic peoples, she is remembered through the image of the milk lake, a mysterious celestial or cosmic source from which life force is drawn. In prayers and spring rituals, she is honoured as the giver of all life. Some traditions place this milk lake in paradise or in the third heaven, where it stands beside the tree of life. There, the divine being who governs birth takes from it the force that will become living breath in a child descending to earth. A Central Asian tale paints this image with unusual beauty. A company of heroes climbs a mountain so high that the sky above it begins to whiten. Beyond that shining sky, they are told, lies the milk lake, and in the centre of the lake stands a dark forest, where the great mythical bird makes its home. This is clearly another form of the same paradise image in which the tree of life rises from sacred waters, and the life-giving powers of heaven gather at the centre of the world. The roots of this image stretch far beyond Inner Asia. A close parallel appears in Iranian paradise mythology, where beneath the tree of life on the cosmic mountain lies a radiant lake that is not only a body of water but also a divine feminine power. In Yakut tradition, a related goddess appears under the tree of life or within it, a great mother whose breasts are immense and whose abundance nourishes human beings and animals alike. Sometimes she is imagined as the wife of the sky god. Sometimes her overflowing milk is projected into the sky itself, becoming the Milky Way. In one Buryat story, the stream of stars across the heavens is explained as milk, spilling from the breast of a heavenly mother. That image has echoes in many civilizations, but in Inner Asia it remains deeply tied to birth and nourishment. Among the Yakuts, this goddess is often called by names that mean giver of birth or creatress. She brings down the soul of the child from heaven and assists women in labour. Sometimes she's invoked as both birth giver and nourisher, because life in this worldview is not only conceived in heaven but fed and sustained by maternal power. In moments of difficult childbirth, people believed she could descend with helpers from above and stand beside the suffering woman until the child was born. In some regions, she was also thought able to pour down a white, life-giving fluid from heaven to revive one who stood near death. The same divine power that begins life can in certain moments restore it. Northern traditions outside the Turkic world preserve closely related ideas. Among the Altaics, for example, the Great Birth Mother lives in heaven on a many-storied mountain. There she writes the fate of each child at birth, sometimes in a golden book, sometimes on a shining branch of the world tree itself. Birth, nourishment, and destiny belong together. Life is given from above, but it is shaped at the same moment by divine record and maternal decree. The rituals surrounding childbirth preserve that same sense of intimacy between women and the goddess of birth. Among the Yakuts, after a successful delivery, a special feast was held in her honour, attended only by women. Food was placed near the mother's bed for the goddess, and butter was cast into the fire with joyful laughter. The women rubbed butter on their faces and hands to increase fertility. In some places, a small birch bark shelter was built beside the fire after the birth of a boy, filled with tiny symbolic animals and weapons so that the child might grow into a capable and prosperous member of the community. These rites are not merely offerings, they are acts of participation in the divine process of life itself. The heavenly world did not shape only birth and fate. It also governed how people understood the stars. The nomadic peoples of Inner Asia, like many others, watched the sky closely because it guided both movement and time. The Great Bear was especially important. It never disappeared from the northern heavens and seemed to circle eternally around the fixed point of the pole star. Because of this, it became one of the main measures of season and orientation. Among some peoples, its changing position signalled the passing of the year. Among others, its appearance helped forecast weather. To the Altaics, it could appear as a stag, and when its stars seemed to draw together, people expected frost, while a wider spread could promise milder weather. The Pleiades carried even greater importance in seasonal belief. Across many parts of the world, their rising and setting mark changes in weather and agricultural time. Among Turkic peoples, they were especially associated with cold. The Yakuts said they bring winter. Their appearance signalled the return of freezing weather and their disappearance the coming of warmth. One Yakut story tells of a shaman who struck the binding rod of the Pleiades and broke it, sending splinters flying out into the sky as the countless smaller stars. This act was said to have shortened the winter and made the cold less severe than it had once been. Another tradition imagined the Pleiades almost as an opening in the heavens, through which frost and bitter wind streamed down. As for the stars themselves, northern peoples could only explain them through images drawn from their own world. Some said they were holes in the sky through which heavenly light shone. Others thought they reflected a celestial ocean. The same can be said of the sun and moon. In some tales, there was a time before they existed, when human beings themselves shone and gave warmth, and only after a great loss were the sun and moon placed in the sky. In other traditions, the sun and moon were sisters who agreed to divide time between them, one travelling by day, the other by night. Elsewhere, the sun and moon existed before the earth took shape, shining already over the waters of the primal world. These heavenly lights were sometimes imagined as mirrors. In shamanic belief, the sun and moon reflected the events of the earth, and the shaman's own metal mirrors could in turn catch those reflections and reveal what was hidden. A hero might hold his magic mirror toward them to learn where a missing animal had gone. That same idea of heavenly reflection spread far north into Altaic lands. The sun became a witness and revealer, a divine eye that sees everything and from which the wise could read fate. Stories also tell of a time when there were too many suns. The earth then burned under unbearable heat until a hero shot down the extra suns and restored balance, leaving only one to light the world. Another tale tells of the Earth Lord stealing the sun and moon and locking them away, plunging the world into darkness until a clever creature recovered them and put them back in the sky. Such tales explain eclipse, darkness, and the fragile dependence of the world on the heavenly lights. The sun and moon themselves were treated as living powers. Among many Turkic-speaking peoples, the sun was feminine and the moon masculine. They were addressed respectfully, called Mother Sun and Father Moon. People swore oaths in the presence of the sun because it sees all wrongdoing. In some traditions, the sun watches human conduct and punishes wickedness. Rings around the moon in winter or summer were read as weather signs, just as in many parts of Europe. The sky was not a silent decoration. It was full of observers, omens, and powers that moved with purpose. Even the spots on the moon drew stories around them. Among the Yakuts, one tale says, the dark marks are a poor orphan girl, whom the moon took up out of pity as she stood carrying water in the cold. In another version, a brother and sister were lifted into the sky. Because of such tales, children were warned not to stare too long at the full moon. The marks on its face were not empty shadows, but the memory of a human story carried into heaven. In the sky lore of the Buryats, the moon is more than a pale face in the darkness. It holds a whole scene. People say a girl can be seen there carrying a yoke with 2 water buckets, and beside her stands a willow bush. The story begins with a child living under the cruelty of a harsh stepmother. One day, when the girl took too long to return with water, the angry woman cried out that she wished the sun and the moon would take the child away. Those words, once spoken, seemed to awaken something above. As the girl stood with her buckets, she saw the sun and the moon coming down toward her. Terrified, she reached for a willow bush and clung to it. The sun moved first to claim her, but the moon objected. The sun belonged to the day, the moon to the night, and so the moon demanded the child for itself. The sun agreed. In that moment, the moon lifted the girl into the sky, taking with her the buckets, the yoke, and the willow bush. The same story is told among the Yakuts, almost unchanged, as if the moon had become a place where sorrow, innocence, and fate were frozen into one image forever. This tale of the water carrier did not belong only to one people. Versions of it spread across enormous distances, appearing in many parts of Asia and Europe. The details changed, but the heart of the story remained the same. Someone humble and vulnerable is drawn up into the moon, and the marks visible on its surface become the memory of that event. In the north, where the moon was watched closely through long winters and clear nights, such stories gave shape to what would otherwise remain distant and silent. The moon became not an empty heavenly body, but a keeper of human stories. Among the Altai Tatars, the moon was also linked to another, darker tale. They spoke of an old man who now lives in the moon, but who once walked the earth as a devouring monster. He was a man-eater, a terror to human beings, and his hunger became so destructive that the dwellers of heaven gathered to decide what should be done. The sun declared that it would gladly destroy the creature, but its burning heat would scorch the people as well. The moon then answered that its own coldness was harmless, and that it could carry out the task. So the moon descended to the earth and found the man-eater picking berries from a thorn bush. Without hesitation, it seized both the monster and the bush and carried them back up into the sky. That is why, people say, the form of the old devourer and the dark outline of the bush can still be seen in the moon. Farther north, among peoples living in the great river districts, the moon could also be seen as a captor of shamans. One northern tradition says that a powerful shaman once boasted that he would fight the moon itself. He rose toward it in his pride, but before he could challenge it, the moon overcame him and made him its prisoner. From then on, his form remained there. In such a story, the moon is not only distant and bright, it is stronger than human magic, stronger than ambition, a place where boldness is humbled. Other peoples looked upward and saw not a human figure, but an animal. Among Mongolian and Altaic groups, a hare was said to live in the moon. This image belongs to a very old and wide family of lunar myths, one that travelled far across Asia. The moon could hold a man-eater, a captive shaman, a water-bearing girl, or a hare. The surface of the moon invited interpretation, and every culture answered in its own way. Even the changing shape of the moon demanded explanation. Among the Yakuts, the waning of the moon was said to happen because wolves and bears attacked and ate it. Each time it recovered its full, round shape, the beasts returned and devoured it once again. The cycle of growth and loss was imagined not as a cold astronomical process, but as a repeated struggle, a living drama in the sky. In this way, the moon was treated almost like an animal or a vulnerable being, one that could be wounded and yet return again and again. The eclipse of the sun or moon inspired even greater fear. Among the Buryats, eclipses were caused by a monstrous creature that hunted the lights of heaven. This beast pursued the sun and the moon, and, whenever it managed to swallow one of them, darkness spread over the world. One story says that the gods, enraged by these attacks, once cut the monster in two. The hind part fell away, but the front half survived and continues to haunt the sky. Because it has no full body, it can swallow the heavenly lights only for a short time. They soon reappear, slipping free from its jaws. Still, whenever it attacks, people respond as though a real battle is taking place. They cry out, make noise, throw stones, and even shoot arrows upward in order to frighten the creature away and rescue the light. Another Buryat version places this same beast once upon the earth. In that time, human beings were said to be covered in hair. The monster fed upon that covering, stripping people bare. The moon betrayed its hiding place to the god above, and in anger the god cut it in two. Since then, the surviving part has continued its revenge by pursuing and devouring the moon whenever it can. A related tale says that the sun and moon were once ordered to prepare a water of life for humanity, but the monster drank it first and fouled the sacred vessel. Again it was struck and divided, yet not fully destroyed. The living front portion continued its assault on the moon, and some people even claim that the dark markings on the lunar disk were the visible trace of this enemy. This monster was not native to the Buryat world alone. Its name, in altered form, points back to India, where an ancient celestial devourer was believed to swallow the sun and moon and thus cause eclipses. The version known in Inner Asia had clearly travelled far before being woven into local belief. To the east, among peoples influenced more strongly by China, the being that attacks the lights of heaven often takes the form of a dragon instead. Elsewhere, among Tatars and Chuvash, the same role is given to a vampire-like creature that gulps down the sun or moon but cannot hold them for long because the fiery stars burn its mouth. However different the forms, the same fear stands behind them all. Light can be seized, and the sky itself can become a battlefield. The pole star held a completely different kind of meaning. Unlike the changing moon or the threatened sun, it stood still. For that reason, it became one of the most important points in the whole sky. Around it, the other northern stars seemed to turn as if tied to it by invisible cords. Among the Kyrgyz, the three nearest stars of the Little Bear were imagined as a rope fastened to the pole star, while two larger stars nearby were seen as horses tied there. One horse was white, the other bluish-grey. The 7 stars of the Great Bear were then imagined as watchmen set to guard those horses from a lurking wolf. The whole sky became a camp at night, with the pole star as its central post, and the stars around it as living beings bound into place. The danger in this myth is constant and cosmic. The wolf is always there, always trying to reach the tethered horses. When it finally succeeds, the end of the world will come. In other versions, it is not a single wolf, but the 7 stars of the Great Bear themselves, that are understood as wolves chasing the 2 horses. In yet other tellings, the Great Bear too is somehow bound to the pole star, and when those bonds finally snap, the heavens will suffer great disorder. One tradition from the Minasinsk Tatars says that once the 7 dogs are loosed, the end of all things will begin. Here, the stars are not passive. They are held in place by a fragile order, and the breaking of that order means cosmic collapse. This kind of tale belongs to a much wider tradition in which a beast, long chained or tied, waits to break free at the end of time. Slavic tales also speak of a bound dog, gnawing at iron chains that are themselves formed by stars. When those bonds finally break, the world is doomed. It is very likely that many of these stories began as ways of understanding the shapes and motions of the northern constellations, and only later took on an apocalyptic meaning. The Great Bear itself was seen very differently by different northern peoples. Many in North Siberia, and even Russian settlers living among them, called it not a bear at all, but a stag. The Samoyeds of the Turukhansk region said that the pole star was a hunter pursuing that stag through the sky. Among the Yenisei Ostiaks, the same constellation was imagined as a stag with 3 hunters behind it. The square of 4 stars made the body of the animal, while the curved stars beside it were the hunters. One hunter was understood as a Tungus, another as a Yenisei Ostiak, and the small star close beside one of them was his kettle. The third hunter was a Russian. Even the front stars of the stag were given precise roles as its nose and ears. The sky, in this telling, became a hunting ground in which the peoples of the earth were projected upward together. A related Yakut story tells of 3 Tungus hunters who pursued a stag into the sky. They wandered there for so long in hunger that one of them died, and in the end the remaining hunters, the dog, and the stag were all turned into stars. The details vary from place to place, and sometimes the same tale is attached to another constellation. But the structure is familiar. A pursuit, a transformation, and the freezing of a dramatic moment into the night sky. Similar stories also appear on the other side of the world, among indigenous peoples of North America, where an animal and 3 hunters are likewise seen in the Great Bear. Such parallels suggest that northern peoples separated by oceans often answered the sky with strikingly similar kinds of imagination. Among the Buryats, the Great Bear was not a stag but 7 old men. One tale explains them in a strange and violent way. A hero once killed 7 blacksmiths and made cups from their skulls. He gave his wife drink from these grim vessels until she became drunk, and then she hurled the cups into the sky. There they became the 7 stars of the Great Bear. Because of that, blacksmiths were placed under the protection of this constellation. Even in this transformed form, the stars still preserve the memory of human figures, skill, violence, and sacred craft. The Mongols also called the Great Bear the 7 Old Men, and sometimes even the 7 Birkans. They offered milk and fermented mare's milk to it, and could dedicate animals to its service. That constellation was not merely observed, it was honoured. In another group of stories, however, the 7 old men or the 7 Khans are not wise elders, but thieves. The Mongols said they stole one of the stars from the Pleiades. That is why, in some tales, the Pleiades were once 7 but now appear as 6. The missing little star was believed to shine close beside the central star of the Great Bear's handle. In this form, the faint star Alcor became the stolen one, a visible proof of the theft still hanging in the sky. Among the Altai Tatars, the Pleiades chase the 7 stars of the Great Bear, in revenge for this old theft, but they never quite overtake them. The Kyrgyz also call the Great Bear the 7 Thieves, and accuse them not just of theft in general, but of stealing one of the daughters of the Pleiades. In some Caucasian variants, 7 brothers protect a child from the Pleiades and carry it away into the sky. These stories belong to a wider family in which the faint companion star of the Great Bear becomes a maiden, a stolen sister, or a celestial captive. One Buryat tale preserves this idea in especially vivid form. A poor man learns the language of birds and, through that gift, cures the son of a Khan. In gratitude, he is rewarded with 7 horses. On his journey home, he meets 6 extraordinary men, each with a special power. One can lift a mountain, another hears what happens beneath the earth. Another can shoot down part of the heavenly mountain with his bow. Another is unmatched in the skill of his hands. Another can drink up a river. And another can outrun a wild goat. Together with the poor man, they become a company of 7 heroes. They hear of a Khan who will only give his daughter in marriage to someone who can fulfill impossible tasks. The 7 men undertake the challenge, accomplish everything required, seize the maiden, and flee with her. The servants of the Khan pursue them, but the 7 heroes escape and are finally taken up into the sky. There, they become the Great Bear, while the small star beside the handle is the maiden they carried away. In this form, the old celestial theft becomes a heroic abduction. It is no longer only a story about missing light or a vanished star in the Pleiades. It is a tale of quest, strength, companionship, and a stolen bride. Yet the astronomy remains just beneath the surface. The 7 large stars are the heroes, and the tiny star beside them is the woman taken with them. The sky keeps the whole story on display, night after night. This type of myth also has echoes in the ancient Mediterranean world. The Greeks too knew stories in which a star of the Pleiades left her companions and moved elsewhere in the sky. Although their tale developed in different directions, it may preserve part of the same old pattern. A stolen or displaced star maiden, separated from her sisters and attached to another constellation. All of these stories reveal the same habit of mind. The sky was not a chart of cold lights, it was a living field of memory, drama, warning, pursuit, theft, punishment, and transformation. A moonspot was never just a shadow. It was a child taken from the earth, a bush grasped in fear, a devourer carried upward, or a shaman captured in pride. The pole star was not simply fixed, it was the central post of the heavens. The Great Bear was not merely a pattern, it was a stag under pursuit, 7 old men, 7 wolves, 7 thieves, 7 heroes or 7 smiths. The Pleiades were not only stars of winter, they were sisters, daughters, pursuers, and victims of celestial theft. Across the sky of Inner Asia, Orion was not just a pattern of stars. It was remembered as a hunt still taking place above the world. Among the Buryats, one old story tells of a master archer who pursued 3 stags across the earth. He had nearly reached them when they suddenly leapt upward into the heavens. The hunter managed to loose one last arrow after them, but in that instant the animals were transformed into stars. From then on, the 3 stars of Orion's belt were seen as the 3 stags, and a little below them another star marked the arrow that had followed them into the sky. The whole scene remained fixed there, as though the sky had captured the final heartbeat of a chase and refused to let it vanish. In the Altai region, the same idea survived in richer and more varied forms. One version speaks of a hero riding on horseback in pursuit of 3 stags. The animals ran so wildly that they seemed to cross the whole earth without finding rest, and at last they sprang into the sky. The hunter followed them even there, shooting 2 arrows after them. His horse became a brilliant star shining near the stags, and the arrows too remained visible. One was white, but the other had passed through the bodies of the animals and was stained red. The hunter himself was also lifted into the heavens, where he continued his pursuit among the stars. In this kind of story, the sky preserves not only the prey, but the entire hunting party frozen forever in motion. Another Altaic telling gives the hunt a moral edge. In that version, the archer had become too fierce, too relentless, too eager to destroy every stag on earth. The god above saw this and intervened. Rather than allow all wild game to perish, he transformed the 3 stags into stars and fixed them in the heavens, where the hunter could chase them forever without ever bringing the earth to emptiness. Around Orion, people then saw not only the 3 stags, but also the hunter, his horse, his dog, and his arrows. In some places, a hunting hawk was added. In others, there were 2 dogs instead of 1. The pattern in the sky was flexible enough to gather many details, but the central image remained the same. An endless celestial hunt. Hunters on Earth honoured this heavenly archer and even prayed to him for luck, treating Orion not merely as a constellation but as a powerful being tied to the success of the chase. The Mongols also called Orion's belt the 3 stags and imagined a wider scene around it that included a horse, a hound, an archer, and an arrow. Among the Buryats, one strange version says the hunter himself had been born from a cow and possessed the body of a horse with the head of a human. That image brings to mind the centaur-like beings of ancient Mediterranean myth. The Kyrgyz, for their part, also saw 3 animals in Orion's belt, though they called them deer rather than stags. Around them were the hunters and their arrow. In their stories, those hunters had once lived on Earth and were so skilled that no animal could escape them. To save the world's creatures from destruction, God took the deer into the sky. Again, the same concern appears. The heavenly hunt explains the stars, but it also sets a limit on human violence. This is why Orion, in Inner Asian tradition, feels so close to the great hunting hero of the ancient Greeks. There too, Orion was remembered as an enormous and dangerous hunter, one whose power over animals threatened to become excessive. In both worlds, the stars preserved the image of pursuit, and the hunter's skill was both admired and feared. In the Siberian versions, the sky itself became a place where that skill was contained. Not every people of the north connected Orion to the same myth, however. The Yenisei Ostiaks called the constellation the stag's head, but they attached to it a very different tale. Instead of a heroic hunt, they told how this stag carried off a bride for a hero. In their sky lore, Orion was not the pursued animal, but the abductor. This shows how fluid these constellations could become in oral tradition. The same group of stars might be a hunted beast in one culture, a robber in another, or a tool in yet another. Indeed, many peoples gave Orion names drawn not from mythic beings at all, but from everyday objects. Across Turkic lands and among related groups, it could be called the scales, the hand scales, or the yoke used for carrying buckets. A constellation that one person saw as stags and arrows, another could easily see as weighing instruments hanging across the sky. The Pleiades were interpreted with the same richness. Some peoples thought of them as openings in the heavens, like an air hole, a vent, or even a sieve through which the sharp cold of the upper world streamed down. Others imagined them as a cluster of animals. In the far north, several peoples called them a bird's nest, often a duck's nest. The image suits a tight group of small stars gathered closely together. But farther south, especially in parts of Central Asia, a very different and surprising idea appeared. There, the Pleiades were sometimes called monkeys, even though monkeys did not belong to the local landscape at all. The name survived because a story survived with it. In one Altaic tale, the being later seen as the Pleiades once lived on Earth and caused misery there. In some versions it was imagined as a monkey-like creature, in others more like a giant insect. The camel and the cow decided together that this dangerous being had to be destroyed. One telling says that it hid in the ashes of a fire. The camel first raised its foot to crush it, but the cow claimed that its hard hoof would do the work better. The camel stepped aside. The cow stamped down, smashing the creature to pieces. But the fragments escaped upward through the split in the cow's hoof and flew into the sky, where they remained as 6 small stars. In another version, the creature had made the earth unbearably hot while it lived below, and only after it rose into the heavens did the weather turn colder. This explains why the Pleiades became connected not only with danger, but also with the coming of winter. The Kyrgyz told a related story in which the Pleiades were once a great green insect living in the grass and feeding on animals, especially sheep. The cow and the camel again became its enemies. When the cow crushed it underfoot, the pieces escaped through the cleft of the hoof and flew into the heavens. In summer, when the Pleiades disappear from sight, people say the creature has returned to Earth. Where it settles predicts the quality of the coming winter. If it chooses wet ground, the season will be harsh. If it rests on dry land, the winter will be kinder. The star cluster thus became not only the remains of a shattered being, but also a sign by which nomads could read the future of the year. In parts of the Altai, the old theft myth was woven into this story as well. There, the Great Bear appeared as a powerful Khan who could not tolerate the wicked creature living on Earth and devouring both people and livestock. He asked his horse how the monster might be destroyed. The horse answered that it could trample the beast to powder. But before the horse could act, a cow nearby rushed forward and stamped the creature into pieces. The fragments escaped to the sky, and the heavenly ruler managed to catch only one of them. From then on, the Pleiades were left with one star missing and have pursued the Great Bear in anger ever since. Through stories like this, the sky became a place where older cosmic quarrels continued night after night. A widespread idea lay behind many of these tales. The Pleiades had once been more complete than they now appear. Whether they had been one being shattered into fragments or a cluster of 7 stars reduced to 6, many peoples felt that something had been lost. This sense of brokenness gave the constellation a special mystery. It was not merely a group of lights, it was a remnant, a ruin, a wounded company. Venus, too, gathered myths around itself, especially among the Buryats. Because it could appear both in the morning and in the evening, it was treated as a special and active heavenly being. In Buryat thought, this star was a great lover of horses. He rode through the sky with a lasso in his hand and owned a vast herd watched over by a divine groom. Buryats considered Venus the patron of horses on earth, and for that reason they prayed to him and honoured him with offerings. In spring, when they clipped manes and tails and marked colts, with the sign of ownership they prepared food and drink in his honour. Strong drink was thrown upward into the air for the star and his horse herd, while meat and porridge were cast into the fire. Live horses could also be dedicated to him and then left free from ordinary labour, because they were believed to belong, in a special way, to the power of the sky. Tales of this heavenly horse lord gave even greater life to the star. One story says that while Venus was travelling in the western sky, his groom neglected the herd for 3 days and went wandering with his dog. In that short time, wolves scattered the horses and devoured some of them. When Venus returned and saw the disorder, he punished the careless guardian. In this myth, the morning and evening star becomes a celestial herdsman, and the stars themselves begin to resemble a great nomadic herd moving through the upper world. This kind of image feels deeply rooted in steppe life. A people whose wealth and survival depended on horses naturally imagined the heavens in terms of herds, riders, and watchmen. Yet this horse star was not only a guardian, he could also be a bride stealer. One Buryat tale says that Venus had 3 wives, and the third had once been a beautiful Buryat girl. On the very day she was about to be married, Venus descended to earth, seized her from among the wedding guests, and carried her away into the sky. By his first 2 wives he had no child, but the abducted woman bore him a son. This story links Venus with the widespread heavenly motif of stolen brides, maidens taken from the earth and fixed forever among the stars. Among the Yakuts, by contrast, Venus was not male but female. There she appeared as a beautiful maiden loved by the Pleiades. Whenever the two met in the sky, it was taken as a sign of storm and wild weather. The Kyrgyz imagined Venus as the daughter of the moon, while the Pleiades were her brother. Such family relations among the stars made the heavens resemble a human society, full of kinship, longing, and conflict. The Milky Way inspired a different kind of imagination. The most widespread Turkic names for it meant the Birds' Road or the Wild Ducks' Road. Similar names appear in Volga lands and even farther north and west. The meaning is plain enough. Many peoples believed the Milky Way served as a path or guide for migratory birds moving through the night sky. In this way, the broad, pale band of stars became not only a celestial object, but a route. It connected the movements of birds on Earth with the order of the heavens above. To follow the migration of geese and ducks was to follow an ancient road laid down in the stars. Other names reflect different ways of imagining the sky itself. Some peoples called the Milky Way the seam of the sky, as if the heavens were sewn together like a great hide or tent roof. Others called it the back of the sky. These names preserve an older cosmology in which the heavens were understood as a kind of stretched covering over the earth, stitched or fastened in visible ways. In one Buryat tale, the Milky Way was said to have come into being when a heavenly mother spilled her milk into the sky. Farther east, peoples of northeastern Asia imagined it as a great river flowing through the heavens. This idea resembles East Asian tales in which 2 separated lovers, placed on opposite sides of a heavenly river, are allowed to meet only once a year when birds form a bridge for them. Such a story gives the Milky Way not only shape, but emotional force. It becomes a barrier, a path, and a place of reunion. Among Turkic peoples farther west, another tale was attached to it, one of Persian origin. In that story, A thief once stole straw or hay and tried to hide the stolen bundle in the heavens. As he went, bits of it fell from his load and left a pale trail across the sky. Because of that, the Milky Way could be called the path of the straw thief. Later, names arose as religions changed. Muslim peoples called it the Pilgrim's Road to Mecca. Mongols sometimes called it the Road of the Burkhans. The Yakuts called it God's footprints and said he had walked there while creating the earth. Another Yakut name spoke of it as the ski track of the Son of God, a remarkable image that opens into one of the great northern hunting myths. Among the Vogels, a story tells how, after creating the world, the sky god sent down a marvellous six-legged stag. It ran so swiftly that no ordinary hunter could ever hope to catch it. At last, a powerful spirit set out after it on skis, gliding over the heavens in pursuit. The beast was so enormous that its body stretched across 30 rivers. When the hunter finally overtook it, he cut off the 2 extra legs and asked that from then on stags and other animals should have only 4 feet, since otherwise human beings would never be able to catch them. This great chase was then reflected in the heavens. The Great Bear became the stag, and the Milky Way became the twin ski tracks, left by the hunter racing after it through the sky. A related Altaic version names the hunter and gives the story even more shape. The hero pursued the 6-legged stag across the heavens on magical skis and nearly brought it down. But the animal escaped and fled northward. At last, exhausted, it begged God to save it, and God transformed it into stone. Yet the memory of the chase remained visible forever. The Milky Way became the tracks of the skis, and the Great Bear the stag itself. In one district, the hunter was even called the son of the god of heaven. This shows once again how the northern sky was read not as abstract space, but as the record of mythic action. The old 12-part cycle of time also left visible marks in the religious imagination of Inner Asia. Across much of Central Asia, time was divided into repeating sequences of 12, each marked by an animal. These could be used to name years and months. The sequence usually included mouse, cow, tiger, hare, dragon, snake, horse, sheep, monkey, cock, dog, and pig. The same signs often appeared on shamanic mirrors and other ritual objects, where they served not only as symbols of time, but as parts of a sacred order reflected in metal, ritual, and divination. These animal sequences were not always identical everywhere, but the structure remained strong. Among some peoples, their arrangement was remembered through stories explaining why one animal came first and another lost its place. One Buryat tale says the cycle really ought to begin with the camel, but the camel was tricked out of that honour by the mouse. The 2 animals quarrelled over which of them should give its name to the first year. They agreed that whoever first saw the rising sun would win. The camel, being tall, proudly watched the east, but the mouse climbed onto the camel's hump and looked westward, where it caught the first reflection of sunlight on distant mountains before the camel saw the sun itself. So the mouse gained the first place, and the camel, through overconfidence, lost its rank. This tale even gave rise to a proverb saying that the camel, believing itself great, lost a year. The 12-animal cycle itself was not native to one single region of Inner Asia. Similar systems appear much farther west in the ancient world, where 12-part divisions of time were linked to sacred animals and to the signs of the zodiac. This suggests that the Inner Asian cycle, like so many other pieces of star lore, belonged to a larger stream of ideas that moved across Eurasia over many centuries. The animal signs, whether read as years, months, or ritual images, were part of the old effort to bring time, heaven, and earthly life into one visible order.